Greetings and welcome to the weekly live stream for the Res Tutor Orbis channel. And as always, I'm your host, Lucius Aurelian. And thank you for joining me for our exploration of why studying the moon may show you what the Earth looks like. And I'd like to extend a greeting to all viewers, prime explorers, and all others joining us. I have a very distinct feeling, though, that we're being joined by many individuals because this is quite an intriguing topic. We're going to explore the moon. We're going to explore moon maps. And we're actually going to question the concept of, do moon maps really give us a realistic depiction, a representation of what the real land may actually be? So all are welcome here, and I appreciate all comments and all contributions. And that first burning question we're going to ask is, what exactly is the moon? When you look at the moon, what do you think it is? Well, I mean, we know what we're informed that it is, and we're certainly going to be talking about that from our authoritative experts who certainly know and have been there, apparently, arguing that the moon is an actual celestial body that one can travel to physically. That's one consideration. There is also the consideration that the moon is not really even there. It's merely a projection. It could actually be a projection on some sort of screen or on some sort of strange plasma field. So there's all sorts of different ideas, all sorts of different theories. And this channel, we're going to consider all of those theories. And we're going to have a little bit of a nice intellectual, hopefully, discourse on it. And if not, well, we'll try to steer back onto that course. But really think about what you first thought about when you looked up in the sky and saw the moon. And I know a lot of us didn't really know anything about the sky when we first looked up and saw the moon. I mean, I didn't really think of looking at the sky when I was a child. Believe it or not, I spent most of my time looking at the horizon. I know, surprise, surprise. But it's important to ask what the question should be and why we should question what the moon is. Because it does matter in terms of what we're informed something is. Because we have a lot of information that gives us the impression that we know exactly what something is. But are we so certain? And if we're so certain, then why does someone have to say, I know, I know, I know, in all their sentences? Now, I know that we have a great debate that constantly rages over what the shape of the land is. Is it a giant sphere? Is it an oblate spheroid? Is it a flat land? Is it a disk? And we're going to be considering those perceptions as well. Here's something interesting, though, going back to that question of what you first thought when you first looked at the moon. Here we have an artistic representation, and let me make sure that you can see it relatively well. I'm going to see how close I can get. Attributed to an artist from the 1500s during the medieval time frame. Now, what's interesting is, being a former historian as I was before my exile, I recall that they went full circle, they being academia, in terms of what people from the Middle Ages of the medieval period thought about Earth. Now, I know we're looking at the moon, but I have to talk about what we thought about Earth at that time. Originally, the prevailing thought, and certainly you heard it in school, was that most of the people in the medieval time frame, especially the sailors, were just not educated about the proper shape of the Earth. In other words, they didn't think it was round. They thought that when they joined Columbus on his great voyage of discovery, they were going to fall off the edge of the Earth, or the edge of the realm, or the land, or whatever you want to call it. But Columbus knew better. He knew that it was a sphere and that he could sail without sailing off it. But now, when you look at this perspective, it's stated that no, most people in the medieval time frame knew that the Earth was actually round. Of course, they say round, they don't say sphere or ball even, they say round, which in my mind almost seems like it's a word game. But it's intriguing looking at this art impression, or was this actually looked at through telescopes in the medieval time frame? I mean, that's what it's attributed to. And what did they actually see and what did they actually think? Now, I'm always flabbergasted by all the times I look through a telescope and amazed at the rather, well, how shall I say, two-dimensional nature of what I see. But perhaps it's just an observational effect. It's why I don't come to any conclusions, because I'm going to explain my mentality of thinking here during this particular exploration and what it's based upon. I'm even going to explain why I went full circle with originally thinking that I knew so much, but then finding out that, as the saying went, I knew nothing. And so there's this other interesting phenomenon that you see with all these images that we have of the moon. And you can do this with the sun too. How on certain photographs and images, it appears infinitely larger than we might expect. Now, we could certainly say that this is merely a facet of photographic images. We always have all these magical things we can do with photographs. For example, we couldn't take a photograph of a single battle in the Civil War because the exposure times were so long, and therefore you couldn't actually see the soldiers marching in formation to shoot at each other or charging up a hill to attack a entrenched enemy or what have you, because it would just appear as a blur. Of course, there's a counter to that because they took pictures of the Grand Army or Grand Review of the Armies in 1865, and you can very clearly see soldiers marching and turning corner. So it's very interesting what photography can and can't do. Here you go from Leo. The moon is larger than Pluto. Yes, Leo, are we considering Pluto a planet, a planetoid, or something else? There's always that inevitable question, isn't it? But I'm always amazed at all these different images that we have that show different reflections of the moon, the little blurry facets that you have. And there's certainly individuals who really are legitimate experts in photography. I'm not passing myself off as an expert in photography, merely that every single image should be questioned and considered. And we oftentimes have very dramatic and artistically beautiful images. Are they accurate images? Do they really represent what the ground truth reality is? Or, as we recall for everyone that joined us for the Terra Infinita exploration, should we question everything we see with our own eyes? I'm not even talking about images. I'm talking about what we actually see with our own eyes. Because are we actually seeing the truth? Or are we merely seeing a representation that's not necessarily the truth? Because, as you may recall, we can prove, or at least we have the idea, that at a bare minimum we operate in a three-dimensional reality. You can go back, you can go forth, you can go left and right, and you can go up and down to an extent. Now, how far up you can go and how far down you can go is certainly a matter for debate. And yet, once again, our individuals who are scientists and historians will tell us exactly how far we can go. Kathy, it's all an illusion. And Kathy may be absolutely correct. It could all just be an illusion. Everything that we see and everything that we interface with every day. For this particular exploration, though, we're going to take some certain things at face value because it's interesting trying to reconcile what we take at face value. In other words, everything that we're told about it is true, but then how do we reconcile it with a factual comparison? We're going to consider all those ideas and every different detail of those ideas. Just asking what the moon is, though, brings up so many questions. Now, there was a time, again, going off of the official scientific explanation, that there was no moon. There was a proto-Earth, and there was some planetary body called Theia, whatever name we have for it. There was a giant impact, insert large explosion, and insert Jerry Bruckheimer with a very dramatic score, and kablooey. Suddenly, later, you end up with the Earth and the moon. But it's intriguing to note if you look at certain mythological accounts, certain, dare I say, pseudo-historical accounts, that's what we'll be informed that they are, there are numerous attributions that there were times that the Earth existed without a moon. Now, this giant impact clearly occurred long before the quote-unquote evolution of human life. Now, of course, we're going off of the mainstream concept here for our existence. But how is it possible that anyone could ever even have a time frame, recorded or otherwise, where there wasn't a moon? And the explanation will be people had wild imaginations in the distant past, and they probably imagined a time during the night when they didn't see the moon. Of course, if it's a new moon or if you have cloud cover, you're not going to see the moon. Doesn't necessarily mean it's not there, right? Or does it mean something else? I don't know. But those are all the kinds of ideas that we really want to think about. Because, yes, it's interesting to note that mainstream science says that there was a time there was not a moon. It was just in the distant past before human beings existed. But also, in mythological accounts and in numerous stories, you'll find there was a time there wasn't a moon. Now, granted, I haven't explored those yet, but I do intend to get around to it because, as I always say, there's never a shortage of topics to cover in this line of work anyway. And so the other official explanation that we have when you look at the moon, and that main concept that we have, again, questioning the first detail that we have. If the moon is a sphere, a ball, that's floating in space, or rather in orbit around our planet Earth, why is it we only see one particular side of it? And we understand because it's locked. We only see one side of it, and that is the side of the moon that we see with all the great seas, and we'll take a look at it. And then you have the dark side of the moon, the side that we don't see. And it's always the side of the moon that's facing us where we have the seas and not the dark side of the moon. And you can look up all the scientific explanations for it with the effects of gravity and revolutions and orbits and all that other wonderful stuff. And we'll talk about it. It's just we should all be well familiar with it because we were all very thoroughly educated on it. So I don't want to spend too much time on it. Just let you know that, yes, we're considering the possibility. It is interesting, though, that when we are on a planet that is spinning and then revolving around the sun in an orbit, all this spinning, all this motion, we have a moon that is not spinning, but it is orbiting, so they say. Now, what do you think of when you see these kinds of images? What really comes to mind when you have this dramatic cityscape and you see the moon on the distant horizon? What does it really make you feel when you see it? I am Kairos. How about those too high and too low tides per day and the full and new moon king tides? Very, very interesting little detail there, my friend, and you're absolutely right. Why do we have all these phenomenon? Are they really connected as we're informed? Now, if you've ever read the Jack Vance novels on the dying Earth, when there really isn't a moon left to speak of, it talks about the fact that there's really no tides. So, Jack Vance's novels, The Dying Earth, and that whole unique set of stories provides a very interesting old world connection if you haven't read it. So I can certainly recommend it. So, win with a good question there. How does light affect gravity? Another great question. Is it some sort of series of anomalies? Or is it just what we see in the moment? But it's a good question because even when there's not any sort of effect, we still have anomalies in our vision. We proved that during the Terra Infinita exploration, didn't we? So, I get uncanny feeling. Yes, yes, yes. Way too big for the planet it orbits. That's a very interesting point there, Leo. And we'll take a closer look at it as well. Now, I haven't gotten to the moon maps yet. Don't worry, I'll give credit to the others who have done the explorations on it. So, as I'll say, just a little patience. We have numerous scientific explorations and diagrams that show us the exact orientation of the moon. Ah, yes, and showing it as a function of latitude. Latitude and longitude, or lat long lines, the very basis of navigation on our planet or our land. And these diagrams, I love this one here from Germany with these two towers and the moon between it. Very, very nice. These diagrams will show you why you tend to see the moon in the way that you see it. And this is the official scientific explanation. And we have very unique numbers that line up to it. Now, just a little note on the Terra Infinita map. Someone tried to tell me, well, that map didn't have lat long lines. Yeah, sure, but I can impose lat long lines on any two-dimensional image. And by the way, all our computers are two-dimensional images. And we'll talk about the individual that innovated the map that's used for navigation, especially of sailing ships, or maybe now we should say steam and nuclear-driven ships, right? This is a really interesting image, though, because this is what you'd expect to see. Why do you have these size discrepancies in these images? Is there some sort of alteration in the image? Now, I haven't altered any of these images that you're looking at, but I'm asking, are there alterations, whether it's image or video footage that shows us the moon or the sun for that fact, any celestial body? Have these images been altered in any way? Is there a dramatic alteration to tell a story, whether we're watching a film, or is it something else? Oh, that's a good one from Mark there. Electromagnetism. Yes, the effects of electromagnetism. Very interesting effects of magnetic anomalies. And yet, oddly enough, it's something we don't really talk about a lot, is it? Even though it seems to be very present. Jamie says it very well here. The more you look into it, the less sense it makes. I couldn't have said it more succinctly, Jamie. Absolutely. And Sean here, yes, fly me to the moon. So it's just all these different images that you have. And here's another contrasting one that I picked very explicitly because I just wanted to show. The moon looks a little larger here. Why does the moon look larger in this image? Is it altered? Is it just because if you zoom in on the moon with a particular camera or some sort of photographic system to capture the image or the video, it's going to enlarge the moon? Now, I'm not coming to any definite conclusions here. I'm just throwing out the questions there. And by the way, if you look with the naked, unaided eye, in other words, no camera, no telescope, no binos even, binoculars, old military term there, then what kind of moon are you actually going to see? Well, it's going to be a very small moon, and it's only going to be about the size of a quarter, you would think. But it's interesting because even when you have these zoomed in images, you can see that, yes, it's a close-up of the horizon, but is it some sort of visual distortion that we're seeing? And I think that's always an important question to ask. Because even just with the rail tracks, what exactly do we get? Interesting thought here from Baha. The moon might be a burned planet. Possibly. Possibly. We just don't know. Oh, here's a good one from Sean. Perception when close to land. Ah. Aha. Yes. Perception. Perspective or force perspective. You know, if we want to film another Lord of the Rings film, right? And yes, I'm being a little bit of, oh, here's a good one from Kirk. Does the moon always look larger in the east horizon? Good consideration there. I hadn't really thought about that, Kirk. Maybe it does. I'll have to pay attention to that. That's a very good point. Marine, it's a reflection. And we're definitely going to explore that one. Dr. Maniac Vaughn's truth. Moon is a selfie of Earth. Very possible. Very, very possible. It's a satellite. It's a giant satellite. ADHD is nuts. Yeah? Why a crescent moon? All good points. All good points. And so really, you have these different images of the moon. Two-dimensional, three-dimensional. Sometimes it looks like it's almost a projected image, depending on when you look in the sky. There's many different variations is what I'm getting at. Ah, yes, the modified Stonehenge. I mean the more modern Stonehenge, you know, because we do have a very well-documented account of how this particular site has been built and restored, you know, like we restore everything, because we respect our history, right? And another good image of the moon here. I just thought it was funny to kind of include this, you know, just for whatever reason. What's this comment right here? Let me make sure I get this one. Squiggles MC Jr. Some people say it's a spaceship. Oh, yes, yes. That reminds me of that most recent Roland Emmerich effort on, what was that one called? Moonfall. Yeah, I'm trying to forget that film. But yeah, possible. Not saying it's a bad film. I'm just saying I'm trying to forget it. Anyways, so all these different images. Now, here's something that might surprise you, and it may not surprise you. Now, from probably about, I'd say, 4 or 5 decades ago, I recall these names being used a little bit more, and some of these names I'd never heard of. But they actually have full moon names for every particular month. Now, who here is even familiar with these different names or was even aware of this? Albie, that James Bond movie on the moon. I hope you're not talking about Moonraker, because they never actually got to the moon in Moonraker. They just got to high Earth orbit, apparently, in that film. Still, though, I'd rather watch that film over some more current sci-fi, but that's just a matter of selection. So, Robert Death Star. Oh, that's a good one. Angela. She's heard of him. So you've heard of the different full moon names. Michael remembers that. And QCC says, no. QCZ, excuse me. Nope, never heard of the names. And Kathy's never heard of it. It's basically about a 50-50 split in the people I talk to. And I wouldn't even say it's a generational matter. I mean, you know, we like to associate and group and categorize things, but for me, it's half and half. Now, some of these I had heard of, and some of these I had never heard of. So let's just take a look at this. Now, is this just something we came up with, or is this showing some sort of strange alteration from what we remember? So January, Wolf Moon, never heard of that. February, Snow Moon, definitely never heard of that. March, Death Moon, never heard of that. Is that supposed to be some reference to the Ides of March? I have no idea. April, Pink Moon, never heard of that. May, Flower Moon. I think I heard the term Flower Moon, but I thought it was referencing some character's name from, you know, some hippie fan fiction in the 1960s. I'd never heard it before. And nothing against hippies, you know, it's just that that's the reference I have with it. June, Strawberry Moon. Certainly never heard of that. Strawberry moons forever. I mean, what the heck's with that? July, Buck Moon. Haven't heard of that. August, Sturgeon Moon. Nope, that's news to me. September, Harvest Moon. I have heard of that. And October, Hunter's Moon. I have heard the term, and I've certainly heard Hunter's Case on a pocket watch. November, Beaver Moon. Nope, never heard of that. And December, Long Night Moon. So apparently these are other full moon names, but virtually all of these, you know, over 75%, I've never heard of. Now, some people have heard of a lot of them. I have not. Oh, don't worry, Golden Child. We're getting to that one. There's more moon names. This is just the first chart, but thank you for bringing it up. Yeah, Blood Moon. Absolutely. Bad Moon, True Seeker says. Yeah, may well be. Bobby, heard some of the names. Didn't know there was that many or a monthly thing. And I didn't either, Bobby. And I have done studies of celestial calendars. And earlier in my formal education, yeah, I laugh a little bit, I did have all the training in a lot of the celestial naming conventions. And I'd never heard of this. So is this some sort of colloquial expression? Are these folk tales for what they call these moons? I don't really know. Dr. Maniac. Yeah, maybe Wiccan terms or some other belief system from the distant past that might actually have connections that we may be interested in. That could well be. It's just very interesting to me. Oh, there you go. Hippie Shake. I've only heard of two, Wolf Moon and Harvest Moon. Yeah, that's about the same for me. So I don't know. Very, very, very intriguing when you think of this. Kitch, are we missing a cycle, 13 moons in a solar calendar? Yeah, we're missing quite a few cycles, Kitch, and it might be more than just one. Anyways. Oh, there's a good one from Robert. Yeah, bark at the moon. That's a good saying right there. Bark at the moon, howl at the moon. You know, I've heard that. I just haven't heard all these moon names. Now let's go to this next series of names that we have here. The rarest full moons. And we'll look at these definitions and see what these really allude to. And if this can tell us anything about what the frickin' moon actually is, because it certainly seems to be all over the place. We have the supermoon. Supermoons look 30% larger than regular full moons. They happen when the moon is both full and also orbiting within 90% of perigee, the part of the moon's orbit closest to Earth. Keep that in mind. We're going to talk about perigee and apogee here in a little bit. So yes, the moon is closer. How much closer is it? And it's because it's illuminated. Oh, how cool. Supermoon. Blood moon. We've heard that. I've heard that. Occurs during a total lunar eclipse when the Earth is between moon and sun. Super flower blood moon. The flower moon is the second full moon of spring and May's full moon. Yeah, I hadn't heard that. Super flower blood moon. That just rolls right off the tongue. Ooh, look at this. Ring of fire eclipse occurs during a solar eclipse when the moon is between Earth and sun and when the moon is also further away in its orbit so that it only partially blocks the sun, leaving a ring of fire. How alluring. Micromoon, I have heard that term before, a full moon that happens at the same time that the moon is furthest from the Earth in its orbit. This makes the moon look smaller and dimmer. Aha! So we're talking about the orbit actually having an effect on the size of the moon. Again, keep that in mind. I suppose that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, right? The blue moon. Oh, yeah, now I have heard of blue moon. I think we all have. The second full moon in a month. Full moons are 29 days apart. But most months are 30 to 31 days. So sometimes two full moons will happen within the same month. And the emperor will visit 2 times in the same month too. Harvest moon, the full bright moon that happens closest to the start of autumn. I have heard the term harvest moon. Cold moon, never heard that. Also called the long night moon. Full moon that occurs in December, closest to the winter solstice. The longest night of the year. The longest night, the longest day. So those are the names that we have for all of the moons. Michael, I've had a ring of fire during a hot moon. Yes, indeed. Hey, Old World Underworld, good to see you. What do we got from Clara here? The farmer's calendar speaks of the phases of the moon. Oh, yes. And it's really intriguing, too, Clara, that when you look at farmers' calendars and farmers' almanacs, you actually tend to get a very accurate projection of what's going to come, or at least a good idea overall with weather. Brother Adam Bomb says maybe it's an eyeball that blinks once a month. You know, that sounds like a line from one of the earlier seasons of Game of Thrones there, Brother Adam. You know, the first 4 seasons when the show had some incredible writing. I don't know what happened. RB, 2012 was when I first heard them name moons. Yeah, it's relatively recent to me, RB. I mean, for when I was younger, I only heard like it used as colloquial expressions, like the harvest moon or something like that, hunter's moon. But nobody was referring to, hey, what's in the moon? Hey, by the way, does anybody remember Jack Horkheimer? I remember watching him all the time back in the 1980s, 1990s. You know, some people hustle pool. Have you ever heard of the guy who hustles stars? And not once do I recall him using any of these fancy names. Certainly not in the previous chart, but you know, who knows? Just one of those things to think about. Anyways, so moving on past the names of the moon, I want to go back to the whole 2001 reference. So the film 2001, written by Stanley Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke, the famous science fiction author. And you may recall that in the plot of that film, the opening scene with the hominids, the human ape man monkeys, whatever you want to call them, we have the character Moon Watcher. Yeah, that was the name of the character. And if you're not familiar with the film, it starts with this scene of these hominids, these man monkeys that are trying to survive at the dawn of man. That's how the film and the book is also introduced. And this character is Moonwatcher. And the Moonwatcher encounters the monolith. Now, of course, if you're not familiar with the story, the monolith is sent by some sort of very advanced intelligence. You consider it aliens or something else. Moonwatcher touches the monolith, and suddenly he is bestowed with intelligence to use tools. Yes, the one concept of humanity that sets it apart from all the other forms of life on this land or this planet or this realm, whatever you want to think of it as. And in the film 2001 and in the book, it's because Moonwatcher interacted with the monolith, or rather the monolith enhanced Moonwatcher's higher conscious abilities and his cognitive thinking. And as a result, Moonwatcher was able to come to the realization that he could use bones as tools. He used his tool to defend the tribe from a terrifying leopard attack, and he used it to kill a rival tribe. And then, of course, he throws the tool up into the sky, and then we see the tool transition over into a spaceship. Yeah, character was called Moonwatcher. I wonder if that's a coincidence. And then, also referring to 2001, remember this is a film that was made in 1968 or released in 1968. And here we have an image of Clavius Base. Ah, yes. And isn't it funny that here in 2025, the concept of moon bases is just as much science fiction as it was in 1968? At least in this particular reality that we're in. Who knows? Give it another 10 and 20 years, and maybe, just maybe, it might be a little bit less science fiction. I won't hold my breath, though. Now, a little imagery here, going back to the scene from 2001 that might have some relevance. When we have this image of the monolith before Moonwatcher is influenced by it, we'll say that, we have this unique alignment of the sun and the moon. Now, has anybody seen this interesting alignment of the sun and the moon before in the sky? And I'll ask the other question, is this even possible? Leo says it right here. I think this film dropped a lot of truth bombs. Oh, did it, Leo? Oh, did it? The moon is a self-illuminating disk. Oh, yes. It's an interesting perspective. So, I'm pretty sure I saw a video of moon bases. Yes, I saw a video of it too. Why are the only pics of the large moon only full? Isn't that an interesting consideration as well there, Troy? Very good point. KC933, during solar eclipses, I've never seen the moon near the sun. And I'm asking, has anybody actually seen this in reality? Have you ever looked up and seen the sun this close to the moon? Is it possible? That's all I'm asking here. Oh, Sean here. Moonlight isn't just reflected from the sun, that's for sure. And that's the impression that we operate under, though, isn't it? That moonlight is reflected from the sun. Janelle, no. And no, I've never seen it either. Tabor, nope, I've never seen it. I am Kairos. According to the heliocentric model, no, not possible. Well, you're all correct, and no one's ever said that they've physically seen this. However, yeah, there's a good point right there. Anything is possible. Yeah, it seems that way now, doesn't it? Anything is possible. But there's actually a film where this phenomenon appears, aside from 2001. It appears in the film Prince of Darkness, John Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy, released 1987, and there's a very definitive image that shows the moon aligned with the sun right before the proverbial or the eponymous Prince of Darkness makes his appearance. And if you haven't seen that film, I highly recommend it. There's also a lot of truth drops in that film, but look, it's John Carpenter. I don't know how the guy got away with so many truth drops or whatever the heck he was exposing, or even the ideas, because he really got a lot in his films. Now, of course, you remember the story of what happened when I went to go see They Live, and when I took my friends to see it 2 weeks later, and it was no longer playing in theaters. Now, going on past the moon, we are assured by the mainstream and many others that our exact planet, our realm, our Earth has curvature on it. We have a lot of convincing footage that shows us this curvature. I'm not exactly sure where this particular image was taken over the land, because I sure as heck can't tell geographically where we are, but I'm sure it's somewhere. Just an interesting note, though. Pretty much anybody could take a fisheye lens, go out to the front of their house, and replicate this curvature with a fisheye lens. So again, I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. What's this really prove? It's an image. Make of it what you will. Now, I'm going to explain something which is about the line of thinking that I have embraced for probably about 20, 25 years now. The individual that we're looking at here is Rene Descartes. And Rene Descartes is actually considered one of the father of scientists, although we have many fathers of scientists and philosophers and thinkers. And I'm not going to go into too much detail about who this individual was, because did he really exist, or is he just somebody else that we're attributing some thoughts and ideas to? That could well be. I don't know at the end of the day. But I'm going to explain what his philosophy was. And his philosophy was based on this concept called Cartesian doubt. And what is Cartesian doubt? Well, I'm going to use this little article here from our friend Andres Furzi, if I'm pronouncing his name properly, from the University of Melbourne. So you see, Jamie, I'm highlighting some Australian academics here because it's important. And in this little article, and I'll attach this at the end of the live stream at the bottom so you can reference it at your leisure, he submits that although scientific evidence says the Earth is a sphere orbiting the sun, there are some people around who still think our planet is flat. And social media plays a role. Oh, yes, that terrible social media. That social media that still helps scientists in many ways. Now, you can read through the article, and he interviews a couple different scientists. And remember that scientists are accredited individuals who can tell us the difference between a conspiracy and conspiracy theory. And this particular scientist that he interviews talks about this. And I thought this summarized everything really nicely. Getting the facts for critical thinking. So the question remains, why is this a theory, flat Earth, of course, that still persists in 2018 in the face of science and even photographic evidence? Yes, because remember, we can trust what our eyes see. Actually, we proved that we can't trust what our eyes see. And we've also proven that any photograph may not necessarily represent what our eyes see. But okay, yeah, so according to this, we can trust what we see and we can trust photographic evidence. We'll take that at face value. Well, it also comes back to thinking critically about information that's out there. Wonderful statement, and I agree with it completely, particularly online. Well, actually, it's not just online. Any information that you receive through any means, whether it's somebody you're talking to in a bar, whether it's a political figure that you're listening to at a speech, or whether you're reading it in an old school newspaper, or even more so, a 200-year-old book, you should critically think on all information you take. Or in the military, they have this concept where they call something information, and then after it's evaluated, it's called intelligence. Although, I don't know, maybe that's not the best example. Anyway, look, this is what the scientist says, Dr. Beckett. Flat earthers are actually employing Cartesian doubt. And the only reason I'm including this is because Dr. Beckett does summarize how Cartesian doubt works really well. This is a philosophical idea that the world outside the self is subject to uncertainty. And you know what? Given what we've already talked about, I would say that's absolutely correct. Now, it's very, very rare that I'll come out and say that I think something's absolutely correct. But I do believe that the world outside of us and even within us is subject to uncertainty. And that is the very crux of Cartesian doubt. In other words, you start with nothing, you question everything, and then you build up your own things from your own perspective that you can validate. That is how Cartesian doubt works. Yes, I am summarizing a lot because I'm not going to take a lot of time to explain it, but it's quite intriguing that Dr. Beckett here says that utilizing this doubt is wrong when you're questioning what the, how shall we say, accredited individuals are telling you, whether those are scientists or historians, referring to a method of skeptical thinking popularized by René Descartes, the French philosopher, mathematician, and scientist. Now, Dr. Beckett does tell us what we should do. And this is really the best part of this whole article and why I'm having a lot of fun with this one. And here's what Dr. Beckett says you should do. I'd say the best way to do your research on whether a story is correct is to actually go to the mainstream media. Wait a minute, go to the mainstream media? The mainstream media that tells us that half of the rest of the mainstream media is nothing but liars. The mainstream media that contradicts itself every single day. The mainstream media that we are informed is not a source that we can go to tell us the difference between a conspiracy and a conspiracy theory. But yeah, he says go to the mainstream media. Okay. To go to those scientific agencies and see what they're saying. Here's my favorite part. Academics are academics not because they're trying to pull the wool over people's eyes. Yes, I mean, what would anybody ever have to gain by lying? Nobody lies. But because we spend a lot of time training and thinking deeply about these issues, says Dr. Beckett. You know, a lot of time, work, and effort has gone into perpetuating the notion the Earth is a globe. Perhaps that's a sign that it is. Wait a minute. So he says that just because a lot of work and effort has gone into perpetuating a notion, that means that something's correct. So, in other words, if we put effort into something, even if it's a lie, then that's a sign that it is. Is that what he's saying? I mean, that's what it kind of sounds like to me, but maybe I'm just out there, in my own little world. I don't know. And you're not supposed to be in your own little world, according to Dr. Beckett. You need to listen to the mainstream media. Although, who should I listen to in the mainstream media? Because they call each other liars. Well, except, of course, for The Guardian, because The Guardian says that they have a funding source from some private entity, and they are not subjected to funding from all of these big interests, and therefore we can trust them. But then again, that's what every media source says. So, but remember, all the rest of them are liars. I love it. He doesn't even tell us which mainstream media to listen to. There's a lot of mainstream media out there. And then he says, all it takes is work and effort, and it perpetuates a notion. It doesn't really matter whether it's actually real or not, or dare I say a fact, although we love to say things are facts and truth because, it's kind of like the ministry of truth. Anyway, so that's the whole concept of Cartesian doubt, though. And an individual who, interestingly enough, we have to refer to, yeah, there you go, Nick. I don't trust anything mainstream because there's a lot of contradictions with it. But we go back to Mr. Charles Darwin. And Mr. Darwin had those theories of evolution, except, of course, unless you watch 2001 or read Arthur C. Clarke. And I know it's a science fiction story. And somehow, some way, Charles Darwin said that evolution brought about humans to how they are now. We evolved from fish, amphibians, hollow tubes. Watch Cosmos. They do that great animation sequence. I'm not going to show it here. But what's kind of funny is that our individual Descartes said that animals were not to be treated as human beings because they hadn't evolved higher level intellectual capabilities. And even if you go with the Darwinian theory that things evolved to survive, how exactly do you explain the fact that humans are the only life form that have evolved higher order intelligence? Why hasn't any other single life form out there evolved higher order intelligence? Because it sounds to me like humans have a lot of advantages using those tools, just like old Moonwatcher figured out too in 2001. So how exactly do you reconcile that with this whole Darwin theory? Only certain things evolve. Is it survival of the fittest or survival of the luckiest? Anyway, it's just another one of those things that they tell us. And being someone who appreciates animals, and I'm not someone who goes completely crazy for it. I've got good relationships with some animals, but I understand there's a lot more going on out there, and everyone needs to come to their own decisions about what's right and what's wrong. It's just intriguing to me, though, how they try to say that the reason that humans have a higher regard for animals is because of the theories of Charles Darwin. Someone actually says that. I don't quite understand that. So anyway, going back to what exactly is the moon, we have some good footage here from the Apollo 11 mission. And here from the moon itself, we can actually see what Earth looks like. Yes. And so going back, we're shown, we see, good one there, Donk, that the moon is a planetary body, at least according to this image. If we take it all at face value, it's a sphere, and we can see the Earth. It is very, very small. Hey, New West Reset, good to see you. But also, we have this image from NASA. This is, you've probably seen this, maybe you haven't. This is from a satellite that's clearly orbiting outside of the orbit of the moon, and took this very dramatic image of the Earth behind the moon, or the moon in front of the Earth. And my, is the Earth very large? Is this at the point where the moon is closest to the Earth? Why is there such a discrepancy in the size of the Earth from this image to this image? I don't know. Maybe it's because they had to compile this image, and the official authorities will tell you, whether it's an image from NASA or any other government agency, that they had to do a lot of work on compiling numerous images, a lot of superimposing and editing and so on and so forth to get such a dramatic image like this. I really can't explain this image, and when we look at this little diagram that shows the orbit of the moon around the Earth, you try to imagine where that satellite was, maybe positioned somewhere here, and anywhere along this orbit. I mean, is it really going to make that much of a difference here when we're talking about, roughly 27,000 miles, even though it's still over 200,000 miles distance, that there would be that big of a difference in the size of the Earth being viewed from either the surface of the moon or behind the moon? I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. It's very, very strange. And yet these are stated to be official images. Is there some sort of subspace anomaly, some sort of gravitational effect that's changing the size? Are we really to believe that 20,000 miles when it's still 200,000 miles distance is going to make that big of a difference? I don't know. Obviously, the position of this satellite when it took this image was still further away from the moon still. How far? I don't know. Very, very interesting though, isn't it? And trying to reconcile that, moon at apogee, moon at perigee. Okay. You say so. It's just very, very strange. I don't know what to make of it. Now, there's all going back to this concept of the fact that we have two distinct sides of the moon. We have the dark side of the moon. Yeah, I love that Pink Floyd album as much as anybody else. Wasn't a big fan of the Laser Light Show. And then we have the side of the moon that we always see with all the great seas. Now, why is it that we have these very distinct sides? And why do they call it the dark side of the moon? Oh, and thank you for that new West reset, and welcome to the new members. I appreciate that. Thank you much, Frankie. Yeah, there you go. Anna says it very well there. Just doesn't look right. That's a very summarized way to say it, and I agree. Donk. Stars at 18 trillion light years move with nearby stars. No parallax effect. Careful there, Donk. Don't be talking about that parallax thing, okay? That's only when someone's talking to you. Don't try to reason with that, all right? I'm being kidding, but yeah. Water the tree. We're all just a melted brick in the wall. Yep, see, that's why I didn't even have to say it. So, there you go, Jamie. Just trust the science. But that's that whole concept. Oh, Robert, I heard the moon is rusting. But what is it really showing us? What are we really seeing? Are we actually seeing a planetary body? Are we just seeing a projection in the sky? Is it just some kind of strange image that doesn't really make a lot of sense? Why is it that we have all these different images of the moon with all these different sizes and scales? And it doesn't matter whether the images are taken from the surface of our land or our planet, the Earth, or whether they're actually taken behind the moon. There's the same sort of discrepancy. KC933. I'm surprised we haven't tried to nuke the moon. Nah, we just tried to nuke space, KC, officially with Operation Starfish, and then they stopped doing that because they were concerned about the effects officially. But if you watch both The Day After and Threads, they do that high altitude detonation that just fries everything in both films. Because remember, nuclear weapons are very, very terrifying and frightening. And just completely forget about what Stuart Manall said, the Vice Air Marshal, the guy who actually witnessed nuclear testing. No one is ever going to chuck thousands of megatons at each other. The USA, Russia, nobody will do it. It simply won't happen. He said that in 1984. He's still correct in 2025. I don't know what to make of that either. Maybe the guy was just some sort of strange prophet, or, he made a lucky guess. Oh, that's a good one, I'm Kairos. They have a golf course on the moon. Yeah, played a couple games of golf. By the way, before we move on, does anybody know the name of the film, basically one of the very few films, where there was a reason for the United States to return to the moon in the late 1980s? I've talked about it before on the channel, and you'll never guess who's in this film if you haven't heard of it. Donk, as many nukes have been tested, we should all be living in an ice age. Yeah, that's if anything was even left, right? All right, well, I'll just tell you what it is because we're going to move on. It's the film Moontrap, a very low-budget film made by Glickenhaus Productions in the late 1980s. Yeah, of course, Jamie's on top of it. Stars Walter Koenig, also known as Mr. Chekhov, and Bruce Campbell. That's right. Mr. Chekhov and Ash team up to fight some strange cyborg organisms, and it even talks about an old human civilization that's 14,000 years. Yeah, lots of ideas in that film. Of course, it's a low-budget film. What else would it be? Atom bomb, reflection of the entire realm. Each crater's a different world. Adam, what are you doing? Are you just looking at my notes? Have you already seen the production? No, that's okay. No, I know, brother Adam, you've been watching since the beginning, so probably have a pretty good idea of where I'm going. All right, so let's go to the next concept. The moon is a projection of Earth theory. Now remember, this is a theory. And no, unlike some people, I'm not presenting theories as facts here. And so what do we mean when we talk about the moon being a projection of Earth? Well, there's a couple different concepts or theories about that. Now, it should be noted that prior to the days of the internet, there were individuals who actually had these theories. This just didn't already start Oh yeah, there you go. Steady. Moontrap added to the watch list. Yeah, I think you can watch it for free on YouTube, in fact. But yeah, very low budget film, but the ideas in it were quite interesting. And if you're looking for a double header film, watch Moontrap and then watch Hardware, 1990, I think it was. Anyway, yeah, there you go, Adam Bomb, Christopher Reeves. So anyway, let me get back on track here. So the moon is a projection of Earth. There are some theories, and they've been around before, dare I say this, okay? Hope I don't get in trouble for saying this, but before YouTube was around, so this is before 2005, there were some, how shall we say, fringe thinkers and theorists who had the idea that the moon was merely a projection. Wait a minute, how could the moon be a projection? Well, the idea that if you're actually taking the fact that everything that we see in the sky is some sort of colossal. Now, I know I'm really going out in the left field here, so just stay with me. But just think of the idea if you're in a planetarium where everything can be projected on a dome. You're sitting in a dome and then everything's projected in the dome. And then imagine the sky being an incredibly large dome. Now, it sounds completely absurd and fantasy, and maybe it is, but that's part of the theory. And yet, oddly enough, if we go back to the works of architect Émile Boullée, you may remember when we've explored this a couple times in the designs of Tartaria and so on and so forth. In his mighty cenotaph for Sir Isaac Newton, he designed something that was quite an incredible colossal structure. Now, of course, Boullée is reputed to have been an individual who was basically an architect who came up with all these designs that there was never going to be any sort of way to build them. But he had several interesting designs where he seemed to come up with this concept of this colossal planetarium, if you will, or whatever you want to call it, a dome where you could project images and celestial objects on the inside of it. Very, very interesting, quite a coincidence. And by the way, there were multiple sketches. Some sketches that showed this cenotaph with a sun-like device in it, and others with a star field on the inside of it. How very interesting. I mean, what are the odds? How could that actually happen? Yeah, there you go, JK, The Truman Show. Another little disclosure, if you will, that's quite interesting. Bunny talking about Disney, repeatedly suggesting this. In many ways, too, Bunny, in many ways has Disney suggested things. So, yes. Jamie, reminds me of the Planet Jackers app on Invader Zim. Yeah, there's many different references to it. And you can find numerous examples in sci-fi series, Space 1999, Mission of the Darians, The Generational Ship, and yes, I believe, was it parodied or, on Seth MacFarlane's Orville series, they even had it. And little cameo by Liam Neeson as the ship captain. But this all comes from this theory, and this is another theory. And I actually saw this on, I think it was God Gev Lamaste, who did this, and then John Levi covered it, gave him full credit for it. And this is certainly not my work. This is not my idea. I'm merely presenting the theory to you. But the idea that the Earth itself is surrounded by a plasma belt. The sunlight hits the plasma belt, and then the reflection of the entire land hits a part of the plasma belt. It's an idea. It's a theory. I'm not saying I know exactly what's going on, but that's part of the theory. In addition to this whole concept of it being a giant planetarium, maybe we have a giant plasma belt that surrounds us. Now, again, that's going with the concept that maybe it is a sphere, but it's a much larger sphere than we can begin to imagine. So, all the people that are the, how shall we say, spherical Earth defenders or the purveyors of spherical Earth theory, or no, excuse me, it's a fact, it's a scientific fact, there's observations. Maybe we just don't have the full story in terms of how large it actually is. But it's very, very intriguing to me, especially when you look at how things like a projection dome really work. And if you look into a planetarium and also all the references to it. And then, of course, going back to this possibility, maybe there's some sort of belt that surrounds the quote unquote planet or the land, if you're looking at it that way, that would facilitate such a reflection of the entire land. And so that's where we have with that particular theory. Now, what you've all been waiting for, moon maps reflecting the Earth and the land. Now, let me get up the first image here. And what I'm going to show you is, I remember seeing this back when, actually, I was teaching, I think it was the history of medieval Germany when I first saw this image. I was reading up on some studies, and I'm not sure why this image came up. But what this particular image, and here I'll move the banner for the time being so you can see it in its glory. What happened was this image is apparently, oh yeah, there you go, the Van Allen radiation belt. Yeah, is there a radiation belt? Is it a plasma field? Is it something else entirely? Not really sure. But back to the whole concept of moon maps reflecting the Earth of the land. What really changed for me, from my perspective, is the concept of the Middle Ages, the medieval time frame. Apparently, this image was proof that all the people in the medieval time frame knew and believed that it was a spherical Earth. Although, like I said, in the official historical write-ups, they always use the term round. Now, can something be round and still only be two-dimensional? The answer is yes. Now, we know that the land we inhabit is not two-dimensional, but it's very, very interesting that they overlap those terms. So I just thought I would use that before we go deeper. Now, we have all sorts of images of how a flat or disk Earth may work or how it could be. And I'm simply presenting the idea here. I'm not saying that I embrace or believe in this idea. If you do, you're more than welcome to. And I'm not here to tell people what to think. I'm here to consider all thoughts. So, the idea that it's a land and it's completely surrounded by an ice wall. Now, of course, they always say flat, but we know it's not flat, so maybe disk would be a better way to say it. But there's other concepts and other ideas for how it could exist. Now, do we have the idea that it ends at what they consider to be the ice wall or the boundaries of the land, the world, or does it go beyond? Again, your decision to make. These are just representations, and they might just be as fictional as the whole concept of The Last Starfighter. You know, we need a crazy supercomputer to visualize it. But things get a little strange when you look at all the different maps that they have of the flat Earth map. And the other thing that interests me is the fact that for some unknown reason, the media just can't stop talking about it. And we all know that if they wanted an idea to go away, they would just stop talking about it. Yeah, Kathy says it really well there. It's a snow globe. Maybe that's the best way to see it. A snow globe where things can be projected in the sky. Who knows for sure? It's all very, very interesting when you try to reconcile it. But moving on past these different flat maps we also go back to this concept here of the system of geography and the concept of the terrestrial globe and the celestial globe. Now, interestingly enough, the terrestrial globe showing you the layout of the land on the globe or the sphere, but then oddly enough, the celestial globe showing you the layout of all the great objects, you know, obviously the constellations, the stars in the sky, both working on a spherical concept. Of course, there's one challenge with it, regardless of however you perceive it. Whether you're trying to ascertain the existence of the terrestrial globe or the celestial globe, remember that you can't see everything, because if you're on one spot of the globe, you obviously can't see what's on the other side of it, right? But of course, we can do this with observations, with time, and of course, superimposing the images. And so you could say that, yes, in this particular perspective, the scientific fact that we're given, that's presented as fact, and it's funny to me because Carl Sagan never once said anything about fact. He only said it with evolution. It's a fact. It really happened. He never had to say it, apparently, for the stars, at least not in 1980 or 79 when they made Cosmos. But interesting that there are these two different depictions of this, a terrestrial and a celestial globe. Now, I want you to keep this idea in the back of your mind about the celestial globe. And don't necessarily hold on to globe, but hold on to the concept of the difference between the land that we're on, terrestrial, and the land that we're not on, celestial. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but we, at least in our minds, understand that we could go visit. well, not really, but we could try to visit the 7 continents, but there's all kinds of issues of that. Maybe you heard about that flyer who was trying to get to Antarctica and the trouble that he had, but whatever. There's also this concept of old models of what existence really was. The Ptolemy model, the heliocentric model, all these different ideas that, yes, Earth was at the center of the universe, but Earth really isn't at the center of the universe. Of course, from the concept of solipsism, every single individual is the center of their own universe. So how do you really look at it? It's just another interesting thing. And then, of course, you see the term celestial bandied about again. Now, what I find really interesting, and I showed this during the Terra Infinita exploration, there was actually a full-up flat Earth map that is recorded and stored in the Library of Congress, apparently added on December 8th, 1920. why in the heck would they retain a flat Earth map in the Library of Congress? Because they wanted to remember the time. And remember, historians now tell us that most people in the Middle Ages, the medieval times, hundreds of years before 1920, mind you, didn't believe in flat Earth. But yet somebody did this map and the Library of Congress decided to retain it? Why? Does it mean something else? Is it to confuse us? Did they just make a mistake? Or was it all about honestly preserving the very interesting history? And that's where things get very intriguing, is when you try to reconcile those discrepancies in history. Yeah, there you go. Unnatural moon. Absolutely right. People defending it hate truth. Yeah, and Jamie says it very well. It is suspicious. At best, it's suspicious. And then, of course, we have some of these other maps. This is from Claudius Ptolemy. And you may recall we looked at Eratosthenes, and Ptolemy apparently knew that the Earth was a sphere or a globe, just as Eratosthenes did, excuse me. But strangely enough, in his maps, he only had 3 continents shown, and Africa is really strange here. Africa, Asia, and Europe, just like Eratosthenes. And obviously, we're missing a lot of land on this particular map that says it's a world map, but whatever, just didn't explore it. But very interesting. Another individual from that time frame, antiquity, as historians called it, the classical Roman era. Was Ptolemy a Roman citizen? We're not really sure. But then during the Middle Ages, the medieval time frame, when they all knew that it was actually a globe, they had this kind of map. And we do get some idea that there's more continents on this. I think we're almost up to 5. I don't really think Australia is on this one, unless one of these islands is supposed to be Australia. But we've got Asia, Europe, Africa. I guess you could even say North America is an island on this. They just hadn't explored it yet. Or were they just trying to give us the idea they hadn't explored it yet? Very, very interesting. And of course, this is the map that when it shows the top, the northern portion of what we consider the Arctic, there's this interesting pyramid structure up there. And here's the pyramid structure over here. Just fascinating. Maybe someone was just stylizing the map. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't have any actual representation, because apparently during the medieval time frame, when people were all superstitious, yet they all knew that they were on a round globe Earth. Was it round? Was it globe? I don't know. They say round, but make of it what you will. That they would put such things on their map that weren't really true. And then these other strange maps that you have from that time frame. And there's no shortage of mappamundi that we can look at, but it's odd to me that all of these incredible thinkers, these polymaths from antiquity, who knew, at least were informed, knew that we were on a sphere, a globe. They measured it using different means of measuring shadows in Alexandria, so on and so forth. They only ever drew maps that had 3 continents, and they never seemed to depict any sort of globe or sphere. Very, very strange. I don't know. Now, we go back to Mercator, and we've looked at this Flemish map maker many times, and this is his world map from 1569. Now, why am I reviewing Mercator before we look at the moon maps? Because, believe it or not, Mercator actually came up with the method of projecting our modern maps that are still used today. Oh, yeah, and funny about this here, Promethean Aham stole Ptolemy, trust me, bro. There's been a lot of questioning of Ptolemy from modern scientists, that Ptolemy ripped off his observations or altered his writings to match his observations. It's really, really strange. So I guess everybody gets questioned. KC, leaning ahead again. Mercator, North Pole map. Well, not only did Mercator do that very incredible map that KC mentions, he also did the first practical world maps. And here is that lovely North Pole map, again, as though you all are reading my mind and know what I'm about to show. And so remember, this is highly questionable. What the heck is at the North Pole? Why do we have these 4 series of lands here? We know it's just an ice cap, right? A frozen ocean. But Mercator drew this map. There's pygmies up there. There's all kinds of crazy things up there, but you can't really go there. There's some sort of gigantic rock. On that other map, it was a humongous pyramid that was very symmetrical. I'm sure it's just representations. And, Mercator didn't actually go to the North Pole, so how would he know, right? Well, here's where it gets really interesting. Here's what Mercator is famous for, in addition to doing all these maps. He converted rum lines, and for those of you who don't remember, rum lines, loxodromes, the courses that ships actually follow when they hold a magnetic azimuth, they don't match up with the latitude-longitude lines. And I'll show you in a second just to illustrate it. But what Mercator did was he drew maps where all these lines were straight, the rhumb lines, the course lines that the ships actually followed following an azimuth. And here's what you have it. So the rhumb line versus the Great Circle arc. So on an actual quote-unquote globe map, now granted it's a two-dimensional projection, the Great Circle is closer to straight, and the rhumb line takes more of a curvy direction, although they both have a bit of a curvy direction. But then on the Mercator projection, when he changes the map, in other words, the size of the squares for the long lines, the rhumb line, the loxodrome, the course the ship follows on an azimuth, is straight. And then the Great Circle arc, the shortest distance between 2 points on a globe, is now an arc. Oh, how fitting. So what are the effects of this type of projection? Well, here you can see it in this animation. And you can see that the rhumb line, which is red, and the Great Circle arc is blue. And so what you're doing is you are distorting the actual map to make one line straight. And this is an animation of it. How fascinating that this was never done until I explored this earlier in the channel. And what does this do to the size of the continents? Well, when you do this Mercator projection, here's what you have. You have a discrepancy in the size of the continents. The further north and south you go from the equator, the greater the discrepancy. So for example, a lot of people don't realize that Africa is much, much larger than we realize as a continent. And places like Russia and Greenland, especially in the northern islands of Canada, they are much smaller. Again, this is the price of imposing this projection of Mercator. So you can actually have straight rhumb lines and loxodromes. And my goodness, look at Antarctica. Suddenly it becomes relatively small. Well, no wonder Captain Cook missed it, right? I mean, it's still a little larger than Australia, I think. But, he found Australia, but he missed Antarctica. But he did confirm there wasn't a continent down there by missing the continent that was down there. Don't ask me to explain it. But a lot of people aren't aware that the actual size of nation states are very, very inflated. I mean, the United States a little bit, Russia quite a bit, but Greenland, it's very, very dramatic. And even all these islands up here. And especially when you see it up here, you have to ask the question, is this the projection or is there some other force going on here that's causing this? Yeah, there you go, Matt. Size matters. Well, especially when you're traveling on distances. So there you go, Squiggles. The sea is very dangerous down there. It's also very dangerous up there. Because you may remember in this area where we have these discrepancies, where these islands that suddenly seem very, very close together, well, suddenly they're not so close together. It's very strange. And so really, it gives you the impression there is mystery. Mystery in the north, mystery in the south, a lot more unexplored territory than we realize, at least if we take this map projection at face value. Or maybe it's just a giant coincidence. And then you've got the little diagram here that shows you how this is achieved. And this is how the discrepancy between the rhumb loxodrome line, or the course that a ship follows by following a magnetic azimuth, is made straight on the map. And that's the price of the projection. It distorts the size of the continents immensely. So this isn't a big deal. Distorting the size of entire continents is not a big deal. Oh, apparently not. And by the way, Mercator's maps are considered the most accurate that you can use for navigation. Now, we're going to take a little bit of a 2-minute break here, and I want you to hold all these thoughts in your mind because we're actually going to look at some different ways of reflecting these maps in the moon. If the moon is indeed a reflection of Earth in some way, then what are we really seeing on the moon? What could it really be? And before we go on break, I just ask that you please hit that like button. Appreciate everyone supporting the channel. We're going to go on a 2-minute break and we're going to look at some of these maps. And I'm going to give some more credit to some of the other individuals that have explored these ideas. And we're going to really look and see what the possibilities may be. What is it really showing us? What could it be showing us? So, see you in 2 minutes and we'll discuss it. Hit that like button. Thank you. All right, so we have returned. Give everybody a chance to get logged back on. So what we're going to look at are some of the different moon map theories reflecting the Earth or the land. Really the moment that you've all been waiting for. Now, there have been a lot of individuals who have explored this over time, and they certainly deserve full credit. Vibes of Cosmos, God Gev Lemsty, if I'm saying it properly. It's a YouTube channel that really explored one of the concepts that we're going to look at in definitive detail. So, what I wanted to start with, though, is let you know that I'm not here to evaluate their work. I'm not here to review their work. I'm just going to share some of the ideas with you. And by all means, you're welcome to watch their research as well. And believe me, everyone's already shared it in the comments multiple times. So there's also plenty of other explorers who have done this. And I also want to give credit to the individuals who did research this prior to the advent of the internet, because yes, these ideas have been around for a long time. And certainly not necessarily the credit is given where it needs to be given. So we honor them by continuing to understand the theories. Okay, so with that said, what exactly is the moon? If it is a reflection of the land, the Earth, then how do we go about visualizing that? Well, there is one theory that says that the entire moon itself is actually a map for the entire land that we are on. So I guess you could say round as in round circle. Now, there are many different variations of this. I just picked this one because really it's the most colorful and easiest to see. And what's really intriguing about this particular projection, so what you have here is this map that's actually derived by a shadow map of the layout of the side of the moon that we see. Now, I'm simplifying and I'm summarizing a lot of things because I could really talk down the details on all this for, well, really all evening, all tomorrow. But what you see here is this layout of the continents as we understand them: North America, South America, Asia, Europe, Africa, where, interestingly enough, Africa actually seems to be depicted at the proper size of what it really is, especially in relation to the other continents. How intriguing. Remember what we saw with the Mercator projection and how the size of the continents were distorted. Also, interestingly enough, on this map, it does show those land masses up at what we think of as the North Pole or the Arctic. We have Australia down here, where we have many friends joining us, including Jamie, Vaughn, and others. And oddly enough, we also have Lemuria depicted on this. How interesting. Now you might be asking, well, if it's practical to reach this, then why don't we just fly to it? Well, going off of this theory, is someone necessarily going to let you go to Lemuria? Is it going to be so easy to do so? Now, you can certainly find the coincidence that air corridors are controlled, that where people fly and travel to, especially between the continents, is very controlled. I mean, you can argue that it's not, and certainly we have no shortage of pilots out there that are going to try to tell you that, well, sure, I could just fly wherever I want to. I'm going to ask you, can anybody really fly wherever they want to, no matter who they are or what they do? Oh, Julia, toroid sphere. Yeah, that's another way to think of it. I'm actually going to do an entirely separate exploration on toroidal spheres, Julia. It's a very, very interesting and in-depth concept, but thanks for bringing it up. So, you could sail to Lemuria, according to this map, says Windhammer. Yeah, it looks that way, doesn't it? Uh-oh. Michael says no, like Luke Skywalker. Kathy, nope. But the other interesting thing about this theoretical map is it also shows you the concept of what we may think of as the ice walls. Is it an ice wall or is it just other land? Terra Vista, Coates Land, ice shelf. Very, very interesting. And so then you have many, many distant lands that go way beyond here. What do these lands look like? We probably don't have any idea if they do in fact exist. We don't actually have any access to them. And then even going way up here, I mean, what exactly do you have? It's very intriguing. And you can definitely look at all the different notes and details about the perspectives behind this. And there's a lot of thought that went into this. So going back to what our good friend Dr. Beckett said about the spherical Earth and all the effort that went into showing that notion, well, it seems to me there's a lot of effort that went into showing this notion. So going by his own philosophy, then shouldn't this be just as valid as any other map? I don't know. Maybe I just completely misunderstood him. You know, I mean, I like to think that we're actually in a society that values free thought and exploration, or at best is an authoritarian society where, as long as you leave the authorities alone, they'll leave you alone. I don't ever dare want to think that this is a totalitarian society where we actually have to think a certain way. It's a frightening thought. Anyway, but when you consider this overall map concept and this layout of these continents, it is interesting, though, that there are components of it that work, such as the scale of the continents and how they actually line up. There's also the possibility of navigation. Now, you may recall, is it really possible to physically travel to these distant lands, these Terra de Vistas or whatever we have, these other bodies of water, or is it not? Is there something else that precludes our travel to it? Or is it, again, just a theory? And that's all it ever is. It's just a concept on paper that has no practicality to it. Oh, yes, we talked about Nos Confuden Terra Infinita, but it does seem to support that concept, doesn't it, JK? Yeah, Agartha, Albie, yes. And there have been many other variations of this map that have been made. Yellow Cat, they are frozen. The lands of always winter. Yes, quite possible. Kathy, for us, not yet. And that seems to be the mentality behind it. Zeppelins are the key. No need for gasoline or fuel. I can't imagine why we don't have Zeppelins or airships. They seem to be very efficient. But yeah, for some reason we don't have them. I'm sure it's another coincidence. But great comment. And so these are the maps that show the entire concept of Moon as a map. And then, of course, you can find many earlier other concepts of maps beyond the ice wall, showing you the continents that we recognize on the inside and then working your way out beyond the ice walls. And of course, this is the very baseline of the Terra Infinita maps. Although I will say that the idea of the ice walls and lands being beyond the ice walls is far older. Like I said, it's been around long before the internet was accessible to most of the population. And I think it was all around before DARPANET even, but I don't know that for sure. Now, we're going to look at the concept of crater worlds. And this is just a representative symbol of it. And I start by showing some imagery of a crater on the moon. The Sulpicius Gallus crater. I'm not pronouncing it properly. Give me 1 second here. Sulpicius Gallus crater. There we go. Had to switch into Latin mode there. So you see, malfunction in the mind. But this particular crater was used as a case study in what may actually be where our continents and our land lies. The concept of craters. And this was all the research done by God Gev Lamsty, and also, and I'm sure I'm not pronouncing it properly, but also John Levi covered it when he paid tribute to these works and gave credit to the research and all the work that was done. The idea that all of the known continents, well, at least 6 of them, were in this particular crater, and that the moon itself is merely a reflection on a plasma field, that the moon represents the entire map of the land. But if all of our known continents fit in this small little crater, then how big is our land? It really gives you the impression that it's far larger than you can ever begin to imagine. That you just have these craters that have these different lands within them, these different worlds with multiple continents, and suddenly the entire size and scope, the magnitude of our existence, our reality, becomes infinitesimal. Yeah, as KC says, that's wild. But if you think about what we've looked at with the ideas of Terra Infinita and many of the older flat Earth maps that show this, then that's exactly the idea that this reflects. You see what I did there? But just imagine that. And so this is one way of visualizing it. Now, these are some of the maps that have been alluded to from that particular individual whose company is now the main entertainment company in the land, Disney. But over here on the left, you have the crater where the continents fit in. And then what other lands do you have? Other worlds, other entire lands where there are continents? What's possibly going on if these places do exist? What if this really is an actual representation of the land? What if the lands really are this extensive? And the questions go, well, how exactly do you reach these lands? How much distance are you really covering? What if it really is 200,000 miles from, say, the crater where our continents that we're familiar with are, and this other crater, this hypothetical crater, not necessarily named, or some other point of interest, where there's another series of continents or inhabited lands? What's the actual distance? How would one go about reaching these lands? And what kind of desolate wastes are you going to cross? Is it a gigantic icy tundra that goes as far as the eye can see? Is it some sort of other inhospitable arid land that we've seen in all those images from during and around the Civil War? Or is it something else entirely? Suddenly the possibilities become endless. Yeah, where are the moon landing sites? Sea of Tranquility, Ubu, technically. And good luck trying to see it through a telescope, too. Portals, yeah. And Jamie actually says it right there. And portals do always come up. So if it's not practical to travel this distance physically, then you have another means of transition, which is portals, which there are numerous accounts of portals, far more than we like to realize. Yeah, and Jeff says it really well here. Cameras aren't getting better. Seems suspect. What's being hidden? And it is very, very strange that we just don't have these images that show us that the nature of the land, our planet, is as we think it is. Why is it so difficult? I mean, we have numerous reasons, but why is it really? And then you look at some of this official imagery of the landscape of the moon, and is it actually reflecting anything? Or is it something else entirely? Because that's where it really becomes compelling, is if we think about each of these craters that we're looking at, is it possible that there's an entire world within these craters, several continents within every single little crater, and we're just looking at this image from such a distance? And is it possible that these colossal structures or these natural structures, these craters and these mountains, these ridgelines are so colossal that we just simply can't perceive them? It's a very intriguing thought. Or is it just some sort of imagery that was designed to show us that, yes, we've taken imagery of the moon. There's nothing interesting there. It's certainly just a small body in space, and there's certainly no killer cyborg robots there. So there's really no reason for us to go back to the moon. I mean, we can to say that we can send some unmanned probes, but there's really no reason to go through all the effort to go back there. We've already been there. But if you look at it from a different perspective, if you think that each of these named craters, all these named terrain features, are actually entire worlds, lands with many different continents and many different dimensions to them. And what if each of these craters has a unique land? And if, as Jamie says, we transition to them from portals, is there an entirely different existence in each of these craters? Then suddenly, just looking at this on a two-dimensional map from the physical limitations, the extent of our lands is far beyond our wildest imagination. And here's where things get really strange. Because from mainstream science, we understand that the existence of the entire universe, all matter within the universe, is large beyond our wildest dreams. And yet here we can see this representation of land with many worlds in it that's large beyond our wildest dreams. Again, another constant in what's supposed to be diametrically opposed ideologies. Or, as some would say, one's a fact and one's merely a theory. One's a fantasy, one you shouldn't be thinking. But you think about these moon features that you can actually see with your telescope, how well you can see them. What are they really reflecting? Will you look at the moon a completely different way after this exploration now? Will you see it a different way? Craters are scoring from plasma currents, not impact craters. I've heard that one, and I've also heard the electric theory as well. But all good theories. Hey, Queen Peachy Keen, good to see you. Yeah, we know more about the moon than inner Earth. Definitely seems to be the case, doesn't it? Texas. The moon rocks turned out to be petrified wood. Well, at least one is. Well, who knows what the rest are? Might actually be from the moon, or it just might be chunks of coal that Superman picked up when he was going to make a diamond. Yeah, I made a Superman 3 reference. Go ahead. Old world, underworld. Maybe our world is a projection from the moon. That's a possibility too. Turning the theory backwards. Hey, Sean, gravity is still taught, even though it's a theory. Well, it's very interesting how things are taught as fact, even though they're theories. Just watch Cosmos and watch Carl Sagan do it. He does it a couple times, very directly too, no less. So, anyway, Michael, from the generation that had names for their own. Ah, yes, indeed. But that's probably the most compelling aspect, whether you see the moon as a map for all the lands or it's much greater, the crater Earth theory. And it's not to say that we're stuck in some depressing crater. It's actually the idea that one single crater is actually an entire land. And then suddenly it makes this whole idea of the moon map very compelling and very alluring in the fact that it really could be showing us just how extensive the reality of our physical land really is. Now, again, it's just an idea, but there seems to be a lot of merit to it. Now, before we end the exploration, I wanted to consider one little theory of my own. And I have been talking about this theory a couple times. And I brought it up before, but just thought that this would be a good chance to present it real quick. Now, again, this is just a theory. I don't know. But when you look up in the sky, do you ever actually see this in the sky? Let me make sure I have this on optimal image. There you go. But when you look up in the sky, what really are the stars that you see? What's it really reflecting? Oh, there you go, Jeff. That's a good one. If we could go to the moon, there would be a McDonald's and a Hilton. Yeah, true enough. True enough. There'd be several. But when you look up at the sky, what exactly are the stars? Now, yes, again, that Cosmos reference, Carl Sagan talks about when he learned that the stars are just suns that are very far away. And you know what? The stars may very well be suns that are very far away. But what if there's something else? What if what we're looking at isn't a projection exactly? What if we're actually seeing something that is a visual representation of some sort of reality that's completely different? Because remember that just because we see something doesn't mean we're actually seeing the reality of something. Maybe we're seeing a distortion. What if every single one of these stars actually represents a completely different world or a completely different form of existence? And that's just how we perceive it, that idea and what's really in the sky. And so whether we're talking about stars or craters, then we go back to the Terra Infinita map. And suddenly the idea that we have of these lands, Anunnaki's lands, the lands of Mars, Pleiades, all the rest of these, perhaps this is merely a way to represent something such as the crater Earth theory, where all the craters on the moon represent these different lands. It's another way to present it. And maybe there are infinite lands beyond our wildest imagination. Maybe that's exactly where science is telling us the incontrovertible truth, the reality. There really are infinite lands out there. They call them planets, but there really are infinite areas that we could explore, again, beyond our wildest dreams. Now, go back to the film Labyrinth. And why am I referencing Labyrinth here? There's an interesting scene in Labyrinth where Sarah first enters the labyrinth, and yet she just finds that it's and it's very ironic that this is shown, it's just one hallway that goes all the way to the horizon. And she says, what kind of labyrinth is this? There's no turns, there's no doors, there's no entryways, there's no maze whatsoever. But it's very ironic that this visual image is shown in this film of a single hallway going off into the horizon in the distance where all points meet or all lines meet at one point, and she can't see that there are doorways all around her. It's an illusion. Is it representing something? Is it representing the fact that maybe we just don't perceive everything with our eyes in the way that our reality actually exists? Going back to the example of the train tracks in the horizon. We know that these train tracks don't actually meet and touch at the horizon, but they look like they do. The point being is it's a visual distortion. If there's this much of a visual distortion over just a few miles to the horizon, how much of a visual distortion would there be, say, over hundreds of miles, thousands of miles, hundreds of thousands of miles? There should be a lot of visual distortions, should there not, if there's this much of a visual distortion with just a few miles? In other words, what we see, and you can go out there and see this with your real eyes, you don't need to see it on an image. What if it is possible then, if we take into account that we are actually in a four-dimensional spatial existence? Then all bets are really off the table. And suddenly the exact nature of the land truly does become unbounded. Those strange, vague terms being used make a lot of sense. There's really no limit to it. So, in other words, you have all of these possibilities of all these worlds and all these craters, all of these other worlds potentially in whatever we're seeing in the stars, and yet the land itself is fluid. There are different variations of it. That even the very reality right in front of you within your own room could be changing in very subtle ways if it really is a four-dimensional existence. Again, just ideas, just theories. And why is it that we see all of these so-called Dali crosses on these old world buildings, or the three-dimensional cross as it's called? And what is the three-dimensional cross? Well, it's simply a tesseract, that's suddenly been converted or folded out into this particular image. Just like a standard two-dimensional cross is actually a three-dimensional box that's folded out. So very, very interesting. Imagine what that world would really be like. Yeah, and Sean says it very well there. Transmogrification. And there's so many different possibilities. There you go, Amy. We have Google Earth. Why not Google Moon? Good point. I mean, you can look at some representations of it, and then they've got that National Geographic map, which, by the way, is broken down into the light side and the dark side of the moon. Very, very good point, though. So, yeah, Marvel does refer to this idea a lot, and it actually comes from the earlier science fiction ideas that have been around even longer. And so what really is the sky? You know, if you want to read some of the origin stories of where this four-dimensional concept came from, you could read Robert Heinlein's And So He Built a Crooked House. Very, very interesting work there. And yes, it has appeared in many places, science fiction, fantasy, the endless possibilities of existence. And perhaps that seems to be why the moon maps are so compelling. Now, if anybody is interested in me doing some more reviews or looking in more depth at some of these map systems, because believe me, there are plenty of them, then simply let me know in the comments. I am Kairos. Real CGI. That's a good one. But by all means, let me know. Make a meme of that Google Moon. Oh, yeah. Let me know, though, if that's what you'd like to see, because I would be more than happy to do those kinds of explorations. And I would definitely like to look at other types of maps if you're interested. So, all right. For a separate form of exploration, absolutely. Let me know what your requests are. Jamie says, yeah. And believe me, there are plenty more. There are many interesting ones that for some reason tend to get overlooked too. So, all right. Well, we'll definitely keep this on the front plate then for further exploration. So I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll pull up a couple of the baseline theories and then put them up and see which one catches your fancy. And don't worry, we'll get to them all because guess what? I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. So, thank you very much for being here. Before you depart, please be sure that you hit that like button. I've got a little bit of a special exploration for the next live stream that'll be published probably tomorrow or Monday. And then we've got our standard explorations that are going to be occurring this coming week. So, hope you enjoyed this exploration and it gave you a different perspective on what the moon and the earth and the land may really be. And as always, you're welcome to believe whatever you like. If you think it's flat, think it's flat. If you think it's a sphere, think it's sphere. And if you want to come on the comments section and tell me you're more than welcome to do that too. Well, thank you for joining me. And this is Lucius Aurelian signing off. I hope you all have a wonderful evening or day wherever you are in the land. Thank you. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the weekly live stream for the Restitutor Orbis channel. And I am your host, Lucius Aurelian, and thank you for joining me for this wondrous live stream. So I finally decided to tackle the great topic, a giant mystery, the accounts that we have of giant life forms. And I'd like to extend a welcome to all viewers, all Prime Explorers, and all others joining us. It is great to see you this evening, or wherever you may be in the land. So, what we're really going to do is look at the different accounts that we have of giants. We're going to examine giant life forms. Now, yes, we'll talk about human beings to an extent, but we'll also talk about other things, other topics about what may be giant and why we have these accounts of giants. And why is this such a contentious topic even to this day? And I'm sure you won't be surprised to know that the origins of it come from the 1800s. Yes, something else that originates from the 1800s or the 19th century, much like everything else seems to. So, in deep diving on the giant mystery, let's look at the rumors of giants and where did most people hear of giants first and foremost? There are many legends, mythical accounts, biblical accounts, and other holy books of other religious faiths that indicate that there were giants in the distant past. Great creatures that were much larger and inhabited the land. And these creatures may have been good, they may have been evil, and they may have been everything in between. And it should be noted that the myth is not relegated to just simply biblical religious tales or just some of the old myth. It's also in many of the fantasy works that we look at. You may remember that very intriguing and yet very little background information provided scene of those giant rock creatures fighting in The Hobbit. I mean, I've got to admit, from the Hobbit trilogy, the first film was the best. After that, and I mean, let's be honest, they didn't have a lot of plot to work with. But I always found that account very, very interesting, and the fact that there are many giant creatures in Tolkien's work, and it is inspired, apparently, from myth. But where have you first heard of a giant? Was it in a myth? Was it in a religious tale? Was it reading the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, anything? Where have you heard about giants before? Was it watching a film? Was it reading a book? How have we heard of giants? And why do they have such a profound effect on our psychology? There's also considering the fact that giants are very contentious. And we're going to go in the background and look at that and see what that's really about. Oh, there you go, Heidi. Beanstalk. Yes, the good old fairy tales, the original fairy tales that we have. Elusive Truths, good to see you. The giants are intriguing. Also, the island with giant animals and insects. Yes. Or the island with the Lilliputians, if we're talking about Gulliver's Travels, right? Isn't it funny how it goes both ways? That sometimes we have these accounts of these incredible giants, and yet other times we do not. Ah, New West Reset. Yes, Goliath. And Comabot, Bible, Goliath. And yes, actually, that seems to be where most people, whatever faith they may be of, seem to have heard of it, because the whole concept of David versus Goliath is, you could say, it's transcended the limitations of just the people who read the Bible or those that are into the religion. I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying that the tale, the account, has transcended it. A lot of people are aware of David and Goliath. It's also worked its way into mainstream pop culture because it's still a comparison that when you say David versus Goliath, most people are aware of it. In fact, Dr. Hans Reinhardt even drops the comparison in 1979's film The Black Hole, when Maximilian faces off against Vincent. Although in this case, David is overmatched. I'm not doing a very good Hans Reinhardt. Anyways, the whole concept, though, being of the individual who encountered the biblical giant. And we're well aware of the tale of how David slew Goliath with his slingshot and utilizing tactics and guile to overcome the strength of the giant and also his impressive physique. And so, looking at the origins of giants and why they play such a strong role in pretty much everything that we have. Oh, who was that from? Oh, thank you very much. I'm working on it. We also have to save ourselves, right? But I appreciate that nonetheless. Oh, there's a good one, Sarah. Yeah, Shrek. And you know what? I'm glad you brought that up, Sarah, because Shrek is actually one of the more mainstream pop culture examples, even from the 21st century when Shrek really became very popular. So great comment there. Now, people give me a lot of grief because of the fact that I try to be plugged into pop culture to an extent, but I think it's important because we know that pop culture is the way that the general perceptions of the main population is being steered. And so I think it's important that we maintain awareness of that. Jamie, I think they have regenerative powers. Why David had to remove Goliath's head. You know what's really interesting too about that, Jamie, is apparently that whole concept of Goliath's head needing to be removed is what inspired Gregory Wyden when he wrote the original Highlander screenplay. Before the producers, as Clancy Brown euphemistically referred to them as a couple of scavengers, got a hold of that script and changed it a little bit, the premise still existed that, yes, the giant's power was with the head, and removing the head is how you remove the power. And that did carry over, inspired, or who knows, maybe it was based on something real, the entire Highlander franchise. Which, let's be honest, there was only one really well written movie, although they did have some decent sequels with some good ideas. But we'll leave it at that. New West Reset, Battle of the Gargantuans. And there's always been something that's been compelling about that to us for that very reason. The whole concept that there was no way David should have been able to stand up against Goliath. Now, in another 21st century example, if you saw that Troy film, you might remember when Brad Pitt took on the mighty warrior. And I'll be honest, I don't really remember much from that film. It wasn't, I thought, very good. I mean, when you remove the entire concept of the deities from it, the gods and goddesses, they played a very essential role in Troy, and the director thought it was silly. Well, creative choice, but I just didn't, I didn't really appreciate it that much. Brad Pitt and Eric Bana gave strong performances, but when you remove the core of the story, which is the intervention of the gods, which oddly enough is something that happens in a lot of 21st century storytelling, I'm not sure why, not all of it, but a lot, then it seems to detract from the story. So yes, that's what we have, this old account. Now, oddly enough, there's a little bit of historiosity, historical account, if you will. Who here has heard of Roman Emperor Maximinus Thrax? Quite a name, it just rolls off the tongue. Sounds like someone that should be portrayed by Arnold Schwarzenegger or Sven-Ole Thorsen if he's going to fight Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? And so that's what makes it so intriguing, is that we have this historical account of this Roman emperor. Yeah, there you go. From Thrace. Yes. So many coming from Thrace during that time frame, during the so-called crisis of the 3rd century, if we take the Roman history at face value. And I think you're pretty well certain that at this point, I don't really do that. And I can't imagine why I don't. So, hey, Petty, good to see you. It's been a hot minute, so. But the historical account says that Maximinus Thrax did exist. He was a Roman emperor. And in addition to him, we also have these images. Now, the reason I'm showing this is it's important to remember that when we just go off of photographs, there seems to be a bit of an initiative, if we will, whether it's intentional or unintentional. I think we can assess that it's intentional, of giants being one of the greatest elements of, well, conflicting information and conflicting accounts. And we're actually going to look at that. Yes, I'm going to deep dive into the Smithsonian element of this and why the Smithsonian is associated with this. No, I'm not pointing my finger and saying the Smithsonian is hiding anything. But I am going to talk about why there's so many perceptions that the Smithsonian is involved in things. And remember that whenever we have an image, we always have to question it. An image may be authentic and it may be constructed or fabricated. Are these Nephilim giants under the government watch, or is this just a fabricated image designed to induce a dramatic response and keep people's attention focused? And then even more directly, ensure that people are not exactly thinking things that they shouldn't be thinking. That is, that giants are real and giants possibly exist. Yeah, the Kandahar giant. That's another good one, Hoop Oracle. And accounts that we've got of involvement in Afghanistan and so on and so forth. So, PK, is this photoshopped? Apparently it is. So, as I always say, I don't know, but my guesstimation is yes, this is photoshopped. It's appeared in many different places. But keep that in mind. We're not just going to look at photos. We're actually going to look at an account of a story of a real giant that someone unearthed, apparently, and then what happened in lieu of that. So it's just something to be aware of. Anyways, it looks real. It looks real, yes. But is it real? Do we know? I don't think it is real, but it might be. I can't discount it. It is intriguing. That's a good one. It's Merlin. Yeah, it does kind of look like Merlin with the beard and everything. But you just don't know. I mean, unless I was actually the one that put this photo together or collected it from an archive, and again, no one really knows for sure. That's one of the difficulty with images these days. At the end of the day, they're not the final definitive proof. There's also the many different stories that we have, such as Gulliver's Travels, where we have Lilliputians and giants. And also think of it from the other perspective. What if there's actually beings out there that are small humans? So is the guy on the right a giant, or is he one of our regular sized humans? And the guy on the left in his hand is actually a Lilliputian or a smaller being. It's a really interesting juxtaposition when you think about it. All these different comparisons and so on and so forth. I expect a bit of media competence here. Oh, come on now. Do you really know what media competence is and how that works in court and how it works in, oh, there you go, Robert. Fee, fi, fo, fum. Yeah, exactly. But if you want to think that there's direct answers and that people can tell you exactly what yes and no are and what real and what unreal is, then by all means. So, Leo, almost every myth around the world contains giants. Yes, agreed. And that's the whole point when we derive it from biblical accounts and so on and so forth. There are a lot of different references to giants, and they transcend many different accounts. And so that's why we say rumors of giants. Now, was Gulliver a giant, or did Gulliver actually encounter smaller people? That's something else that really enters my mind because we have all these different scales, if you will, all these different dimensions of size. And I even remember in the 1970s, they had that theory about, well, there could be an entire universe within the atoms of my finger. Although then there's always the discussion, do atoms really exist? Well, science assures us that they do, but at what point does size stop? And of course, I still remember Carl Sagan trying to figure out about how many cuts it would take in an apple pie until you reach the apple. Of course, as he said, the pie is too crumbly and you can't actually reach the atom. But if we could, how many cuts would it take? Yeah. I think that was episode 7 of Cosmos, but it doesn't matter. And then going back to Maximinus Thrax. Yes, we do have some Roman coinage that indicates that Maximinus Thrax existed, apparently. Although, of course, we don't know what year it is, because remember, those Romans, despite being so organized and capable of doing stunning architectural and engineering achievements, didn't really seem to bother to want to put dates on their coins. And you'll say, well, they just put the emperor's face on there. That should be good enough, right? I mean, that's corresponding to the year. You don't need to put the year on Roman coinage. I just always found that funny. And, there's other allusions to Maximinus Thrax, if he did indeed exist. And how tall was Maximinus Thrax? Well, he was stated to be over 8 feet tall. Now, I'm going to ask you all a question right now before we go further. Is 8 feet tall something beyond physical impossibility? Has there been a human being that is very well documented, well recorded, and undisputed that was actually over 8 feet tall? And what are the responses I get on this little question? Because, these kind of things just always make me interesting. Oh, there you go, Baja Giant from WCW. Yeah, that's right. Jamie, yes, you are correct, Jamie. Oh, there we go. PJ Kocher. Yes, Robert Wadlow, the Alton Giant. We're going to get a look at him, and he's still in the Guinness Book of World Records to this day. Robert Waldlow. Yes, that's the name. I believe there's a W at the end of it, but yep, same name. So, and in fact, Robert almost got up to 9 feet tall, interestingly enough. So, oh, yes, you're right. New West Reset, Canada had 2, a man and a woman. So there have been multiple people who have actually been over 8 feet tall that are very well documented. Now, the only reason I'm going to focus on Robert is because he's stated to be the tallest, and it's undisputed. Robert Waldlow. So there you go. Oh, yes, Jamie, there are photos of Mongolian giants. There's actually all kinds of photos of giants. Now, we can go back and forth on the veracity of the photos, and I'll admit some do look very, very authentic. Some do not. And you just have to ask those questions because it is possible to put together a very good image that looks very authentic that is not authentic. Believe me, I know. I've done it a few times. No, I've never shown one of those images since I've been doing these presentations. In fact, I often get a lot of criticism because I use poor images, but there's a reason for that. I'm not trying to fool people with images. That's not my intention here. You ultimately have to come to your own conclusions about what the images we use are and what the images that you see every day. Because it doesn't matter what I show in this little YouTube channel on these little live streams. You're going to see all these images through many different mediums every day. Ultimately, you have to come to your own conclusions. Oh, yeah, the Solomon Island giants. That's another good example, Ted. I mean, at the end of the day, they're all over the place. It's not just the mythical or religious accounts that we have. It's the fact that there are legends that they have originated all over the place. Yeah, that's another good one there, Griff. Yep. Jake Ehrlich, 8'6". And so we've got multiple examples, many individuals who've broken the 8-foot barrier. So Maximinus Thrax doesn't seem so impossible. Although, did he really exist? Was he actually a Roman emperor, or was there something else? Those are the kinds of questions that we need to ask, especially when it comes to Roman history. So, with that said, let's take a look at some accounts that we have of plants and animals that are quite giant before we deep dive into humans, because we want to start at a certain place and determine where this giant or colossal mentality begins with. So, let us go to this next image here. And I would like you to tell me if anybody knows where this is. I'm sure many of you do. And even if you haven't actually been here, you've probably seen it on a film or two. And let me make sure you got full screen on that one. There we go. And does anybody know where this is? Oh, yeah, the Kraken. And I'm sure you're referring to the real Kraken from the original Clash of the Titans, right? mm. Oh, Wynn says it really good. Yes, a stump. It does look like a tree stump, doesn't it? And where is this? Oh, Jamie knows where it is. The Aussie knows where it is. Devil's Tower. That's the name of it. So, QCZ. That is Devil's Tower in Wyoming, although it's really only a stone throw across from the South Dakota border. So, if you're heading out that way on I-90, then you can go and see the Black Hills. You can go see Custer National Forest, and then just go a little further down the interstate and come to this beauty, Devil's Tower. Mashed potatoes. Yeah, well, funny you say that, New West Reset. Good to see you, by the way. They also have statements that there was a bear that scratched it. Hey, fairy girl, good to see you. Been a while. It's a haunted place. Yes, there's all kinds of legends with this location in Wyoming. So first and foremost, what does the mainstream tell us about this? They tell us that this used to be a volcano. It was formed by a volcano. Isn't it always? Now, yes, it may look like a tree stump, but just because it looks like a tree stump, just because it has qualities of a tree stump, does not mean it's a tree stump, okay? It is a volcano. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Now, just because nobody actually witnessed it forming, and it's not possible for anybody to have witnessed this forming, or was it, that we know that a volcano did it. At least that's the certainty that we have from our scientific and historical authorities. And remember, they're one and the same. But yes, scientific and geological assessments on this, it's just a volcano, and that's all there is to it. Now, it was featured as a key terrain feature in the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind. You might remember when Richard Dreyfuss's character went bonkers, this is where he wanted to go to. And it's a good thing for him that those aliens were benevolent and not malevolent in that film. So, anyway, now, does it look like a tree? Yes. If it was a tree, could it have once been a great tree? Yes. But remember, science tells us this is most definitely not a tree. So therefore, come to your own conclusions. It looks like a tree to me, but. And then in Ireland, so going from Wyoming, vicinity of the Rockies, or actually the Great Plains, it's right before you get to the Rockies, to Ireland, we have Giant's Causeway. Giant's Causeway. Oddly enough, it has a lot of structural similarities to what we just saw with Devil's Tower. And you'll never guess what science tells us about the origin of Giant's Causeway. Now, I'll tell you the myth in a second here, but of course they tell us that it's, once again, those volcanoes again. Those busy volcanoes are just at it again. Oh, Marlowe, didn't they find a root system? Yes, that has been stated if you're talking about Devil's Tower, although, once again, that is highly controversial, but it has been stated. New West Reset's got it. Hexagon, you're absolutely right. There is a hexagon impression in both of them. Rescue Freedom. And New West Reset has it. It's volcanoes again. Those volcanoes are sure busy. They're just like glaciers. They can produce all kinds of unique terrain features. It's either a glacier when we have unique terrain features, or it's a volcano when we have really unique terrain features. And don't forget that lovely shiprock in New Mexico, volcanoes. You got it. Because what else would it be? It has to be volcanoes. Oh, that's a good one there, Channel 53. Looks like petrified bark streaks. It does, doesn't it? Just like it does on Devil's Tower. Great way to say it. Very succinct way to say it. Hey, Casey. Yeah, busy creating hexagons. No doubt about it. So a very geometrically symmetrical shape that is just randomly created by nature. That's what will be informed. Now, if you go back and you look at some old artistic impressions, now, I don't know when this is from because it's a sketch. Now, remember, a sketch, much like a photo, does not necessarily prove anything, but it does provide clues. It does give hints. And apparently, Giant's Causeway in Ireland was once much more extensive, as this image seems to allude to. Now, was it? I don't know for sure. But the myth behind it is that legendary Irish Celtic hero Finn McCool, yes, I'm saying that in the anglicized way because if I say it in the Gaelic way, I'll get in trouble, and I'm not trying to get in trouble tonight. But anyway, a mythical Irish hero actually created this. And you might remember that's the same mythical Irish hero that we talked about that participated in that battle that we're really not supposed to talk about for some reason. I'm not sure why. That battle that occurred in Western Ireland when they resisted the forces of the King of the World. But anyway, enough about that. So we have these images that show us that apparently this Giant's Causeway was something that was much more extensive. Now, what was this? Was this the remains of some kind of giant flora or fauna? Yes, I'm using both interchangeably because we know which is which, right? But was it some sort of giant plant? Was it some kind of structure? Or was it something else entirely? No, I'm not going to go into mud fossils yet. That will be a separate live stream exploration. But it is interesting to consider all the possible origins of these unique hexagonal shapes. So, was it made by some mythical hero who actually really existed and had access to technology that's beyond our wildest dreams? Was it some gigantic life form? Was it once a giant tree? Or are the scientists correct and it's just volcanoes? Volcanoes here, volcanoes there, even though there's no active volcanoes in either location, but they're extinct volcanoes, so we can just accept their explanation. And maybe that's good enough for you. And, there was a time, I'll admit, it was good enough for me. However, it's not good enough for me anymore. I believe it needs to be scrutinized more. But that's just my impression on it. If you believe otherwise, that's all right. So let's take a look at some of the great trees that we do have images of. Now, once again, we're going to go back to the 1800s. Yeah, there you go, Jamie. Trust the science. Where's Mr. Wizard? And that's exactly what Carl will say to you. Carl Sagan, of course. So, hey, it's Space Fraggle. Good to see you, Lord Krug. I will not conform. I can just hear that Christopher Lloyd voice being said on that. So, anyway, we start by looking at some of these giant trees. And we've looked at giant trees before on the channel. We did an exploration that was dedicated to it. But I don't think we really understood, and I didn't do a very good job in that exploration of covering the extensiveness of these giant trees. I only talked about the ones in the United States and some that may have been in Europe. But the reality is they're everywhere. This image is from Mexico, believe it or not, or Mexico. And we see some very well-dressed people. Looks like we're in Oaxaca. Is that really where we are? Not sure, but very, very impressive tree in this image. So it wasn't just in the United States. Massive trees everywhere. Now, the famous example that we're aware of from the United States that we have no shortage of images from is the destruction of the redwood forest. And here you can get an idea of just how large these trees are. Now, one of the contentious points that we have with this whole concept of giant objects, whether it's plants, animals, or people, is that there are scientific limitations on how large anything can be. And you know what? That may be true. But it's intriguing to me that the further we go back in time, we have more and more examples. And by the way, I'm looking at this from a mainstream perspective as well, because even science says this. The further we go back in time, there are legitimate examples of larger flora and fauna. There are examples of larger plants and animals, and there seem to be examples of larger beings. So given the fact that both the mainstream account and the myth do agree on this fact, the only thing that varies is the timeline. So in the mainstream account, they'll tell you it was millions of years ago, and over that time, the climate differed, and therefore it was more oxygen rich. And yet, of course, there's theories about things like the water canopy and so on and so forth. No, I'm not going to get into that today, but just letting you know those ideas are out there. And that's how there may be theories for why we had this dramatic change. And there is no shortage of these impressive images where these trees seem to have been destroyed. Also interesting with the arid landscape. Now, I'm not talking about the fact that they're logging here. I understand that. But look at this landscape. Very, very interesting. I mean, I've been on a couple logging sites in my life. No, I wasn't with the loggers that got hijacked by the UFO in Arizona. But it's very intriguing that when you look at these older images, you do get this desiccated landscape where it looks just completely dry. So how the heck could there be a forest there? I don't know. Is there something else going on with the image? Is there some other event that's occurred that we're not aware of? Those are the kinds of questions I ask when I see a photo like this, because I'm under the impression there's a high probability that this may well be an authentic photo, but I don't know for sure. It is certainly a dramatic one. But what are your thoughts on that? Why do we always see this dead land? Yeah, there you go, Nomi. They emptied out the lot. That sounds about right. Ah, the Grand Canyon is a quarry. It definitely looks like that, doesn't it? I need to get back there, by the way. Dallas, trees inhale carbon dioxide and exhale oxygen. They're wondrous. They're amazing. Ah, you say it right there, KC933, Dust Bowl. Yeah, we always have that effect in those images. Hey, brother Adam Baum, normal sized tree with a Photoshop, people. Intriguing, impressive, isn't it? Remember, never trust any image. Come to your own conclusions. And don't be afraid to ask those questions. Carol, cleaning up the dead trees after a disaster. That's the assessment that I would lean towards as well. Not to say that's exactly right. It's a theory, but yes, that's what it looks like to me in a lot of these images. That it's really just a big cleanup after, as Wynn says very directly here, the apocalypse, or as we call it, the reset. Leo, it takes almost 1,000 years for these trees to grow that big. These trees must have been very special to the native people who lived among them. I would agree with that. And it does seem that there's a lot of identity with them that continues to this very day. Now, you can even find some other images, drawings, or sketches of people who've converted redwoods into their houses. Now, did this really happen? I don't know, but it is an interesting premise. And certainly there's still redwoods to this day that are large enough, so it's not beyond the realm of possibilities. But then there's this other oddity that we have with some of these colorized images from the 1800s. Now, the reason I'm showing this is I just want to, again, reinforce the fact that images are altered. If we have black and white photos and we've colorized them, then have those images been altered? And if they've been altered, have they been altered in a way that would cause us to question their authenticity? Because it's a very important consideration when you're doing this kind of investigation and these explorations. You may be looking at something that's very authentic and real, or you may be looking at something that's telling you 97% truth, but 3% of it has been altered. So did they get the actual color of the clothing right? Was this guy really wearing a blue jacket when he was just sitting in there? Oh, and look, we have a very well-dressed individual with a little mustache. How intriguing. There are two mustache guys. It looks like everybody has mustaches. I guess, this was after the Civil War when we went away from the beard and everybody went with the mustache. Where's Groucho Marx when you need him? But very, very intriguing images that we have to question because remember, if they've altered the photo, then did they get it right? Is the coloring right? Is there something that we could even be missing if they change the coloring improperly? Because if you have a black and white photo, then how can you have any idea? Yeah, there you go, Sean. Exactly. Why would anybody take that kind of risk just to pose for a photo in their suits? Weren't they concerned about safety? Now I know everyone will tell us nobody concerned themselves with safety in the 1800s, even though we've got numerous newspaper and journalist accounts that say that, yes, people were concerned with safety, but, I guess it just depended on the day. Yeah, Jamie says it very well right there. Suspicious. Adam Bomb, 5 guys and a handsaw. That's right, brother Adam. Why don't you meet me with a handsaw and we'll see how long it takes the two of us to bring down a tree like that, right? I'm sure we could do it in 5 minutes. 5 minutes of your money back. Michael, how Da Vinci hid secret geometry behind his oil paintings. Oh, you noticed that little symbol. Yes, very, very astute of you, Michael. It just always shows up. That's right, Space Fraggle. No OSHA back then. But remember, there was no OSHA in Starfleet either, especially in Star Trek The Next Generation. Remember how many times an episode with a falling barrel created a catastrophe? Oh, I can only imagine what happened in those cargo bays with those falling barrels all the time. Anyways. So yes, all these trees with people cutting them down with handsaws, I suppose, or were they just posing with them? I don't know. Because remember, this is after that questionable time of the United States Civil War, of the Crimean War. So who exactly knows what's going on? Here's another one for Mexico, and I'm just showing this to ensure that we realize that in other locations there were other incredibly large, thick trees. Now, were these all of the same tree variety or breeds of tree, or were there other trees that were lost, other kinds of trees that we don't have with us anymore? Because we have some of these images that, did somebody actually cut this tree down? Now, something I haven't shown on the channel yet, but I'm going to be doing it in one of the subsequent map explorations in a couple weeks, and I'll probably do it live stream because I love the feedback on it. There are several maps that I've located that actually use trees like this as known points on the map. Yes, trees that are so large and tall that they stand out in a forest and you can use them as a known point. Very interesting. Now, it'd been a subject of contention, and I remember when we did map studies back when I was still teaching, there was a lot of debate about the accuracy of the Mappa Mundi, the maps from the Middle Ages, or, where people all believed the world was round, apparently, or spherical, or globe, or whatever, even though the Bible says that the earth was flat. And we also understand that if anybody went against the Bible, especially in Europe during the Middle Ages, they faced a very terrifying death. But I guess everybody still somehow knew that. Yes, that's the mother of all conflicting accounts. And I'm not being facetious there, it really is. But then you get some of these other interesting looks. I mean, here they call this the Flatiron Tree. How intriguing. Just like the Flatiron Building. Do I see a couple faces in there, or is that just me? Is that just my crazy imagination going off on me? Ah, Sissy May right there. That's a good one. I thought lumberjacks had full beards. Yeah, you and me both. I guess they degraded to mustaches or downgraded to mustaches. So, yeah. Ooh, Earth is Flat. Great one. Yes, Rush did a good song about that. The trees. Hey, everybody, if you're into Rush, great Canadian band, I might add, listen to that song, The Trees. Pay attention to the lyrics. It is very interesting. So, ooh, Jamie. Yeah, it does kind of look like Ents, doesn't it? Again, going back to the Tolkien legendarium, if we want to say it. Okay, so it's not just me. Thank you, Space Fraggle. Is it an entrance like Kroll? Oh, Sean, of course, bringing up my favorite movie. Yeah. So anyway, it's just intriguing though, and I'm thinking of the example of the weirwood trees from the Game of Thrones franchise, but let's be honest, it's appeared in many other franchises. So very, very, very interesting that we have images such as this, where we can see physical features. And if you look hard enough, I mean, really, I don't think you have to look very hard or use your imagination that much. Eyes, nose, mouth, little beard, eyes, nose. Oh, yeah, it's just my imagination. Okay. I'm having some kind of mental aberration here. So we'll just go on to the next image. But then there's also the account of the American chestnuts. Now, we did explore that in that exploration we did last year on the trees. And yeah, here's another rather risque photo. Let's have the ladies all sit up here, shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip, right here in this opening of this tree. And we'll just pose down here and look really cool. Ah, look what we did. Yeah, look, no facial hair here. No mustaches even. I guess we went down from that. But the American chestnut, a great tragedy, showing you exactly in this map how extensive these American chestnuts were. Now, according to accounts, these American chestnuts could be just as large, and in some cases, larger than the redwoods. Now, those are just accounts. I don't know. I didn't see any. I wasn't alive in the 1800s or even the early 1900s to know for sure. I know some of you say I was, but I wasn't. I really wasn't. But this is what the official historical account tells us, the extent of the natural range of the American chestnut. That concept that a squirrel could hop all the way from New England all the way down to Alabama and Georgia without ever touching the ground. Now, if you're familiar with Georgia, they still have a pretty nice forest once you get south of Atlanta. And I'm not even going to say anything about the mountains. Yeah, there's a forest there too. So very, very pretty state. Really, they're all pretty states. I don't know why the South gets such a bad reputation, but anyway, it's a lovely area, and it's intriguing to think that the chestnut was lost. Now, you may remember from the exploration, there are no American chestnuts because there was a blight, of course, brought in from another nation, and it destroyed the American chestnuts. Now, there are still areas that have the ability to produce American chestnuts, but is it the same tree, or is it something else entirely? And so just looking at that, yeah, there you go, Earth is Flat. If one of those acorns hits you, it'll kill you. There's also the fact that those acorns apparently had a lot of nutritional properties to them. There were a lot of old recipes that involved using American chestnuts. Yeah, there you go, Texas Redneck Hippie. And there's a lot of people in the South that are still aware of these old concepts and these old recipes, vital food source. And the Native Americans, or whoever they really were, the people that were in the area, they were well acquainted with them as well. So, Battlestar Utarian. Rush may be the best three-man rock band known in this realm, true legends. They've got some very, very revealing albums, too. Don't forget the Temples of Syrinx, right? Sissy May, are the American chestnut tree almost extinct? Officially, they are, but they aren't completely extinct. Apparently, there's still groves and there's still areas that they can regenerate them. But what we don't know is, are they the exact same trees that we had in the past? So again, I'm suggesting, is it possible that we had a much greater tree that was lost to time? That's what we don't know. Oh yeah, the 2112 Overture. That's a good one. So anyway, so that's the range of the lost American chestnut. Now, let's just briefly talk about animals to an extent. A lot of people get wrapped around the bend about the dinosaurs. What I find interesting about the existence of the dinosaurs, and of course, we always have all these interesting and differing names for the dinosaurs, is well, do you think dinosaurs could have existed? It's possible that dinosaurs could have existed. And it's interesting to me that somehow we're able to know of a life form that existed 60 million years ago. And it's very contentious when you talk about the bones and finding these dinosaurs. But once again, mainstream science and history tells us that yes, there really were dinosaurs. It was a very long time ago, again. Now, is it possible that there could have been other creatures? Creatures that we might think of as mythical creatures? Creatures that we call dragons. Could they be related to the dinosaurs? Are they, in fact, the same creature? Is it some kind of cover up? I don't know. But there's a lot of coincidences to ignore about it if that's the case. And is it possible that if there were dinosaurs or dragons, that people did coexist with them, even though science tells us it's not possible? People never could have coexisted with dinosaurs because such vast differences in the timeline and evolution or evolution, depending how you say it. Always so funny. A good example here of the mighty blue whale. The great blue whale, the life form that still exists to this day that you can still go out and see if you're lucky enough to see one in the ocean or the sea, wherever you happen to be. The very, very large and impressive blue whale. And then, of course, thinking to again, going back to the Tolkien legendarium, where we have Ancalagon, the dragon that was the size of a mountain. Now, again, that goes more into the mud fossil concept or theory. But it is intriguing going to these extremes because people want to say there's really no giants out there, even though everyone's well aware there's blue whales out there that are very, very large. Is it possible that there is something that was much larger and that's just been lost to time, just like with the trees? Is it possible there was once a great, incredible creature? And just for scale here, you've got the airship of the elves here, and you got some of the eagles. Yeah, if you remember the eagles from Lord of the Rings, that's the size scale here compared to Ancalagon. And here's some of the other dragons fighting with him, if you remember Smaug and how impressive he seemed. That's how incredible Ancalagon was stated to be. So again, gargantuan, colossal size, it just seems the prospect of myth and seems completely impossible. Yeah, there you go, Jamie. Leviathan. And many other names for it as well. Oh, Rachel, you also have to bring up Triumph. You know what? Yeah, it's kind of interesting. My two favorite bands are Canadian bands. Nothing wrong with that, though. Nothing wrong with that at all. But then just looking and seeing the fact that, you have blue whales that can be up to 30 meters or 100 feet long, depending, and even other large whales, the whole concept of Moby Dick. And, if you want to look up something interesting, look up the history of Herman Melville and how nobody cared a whit about Moby Dick when it was originally written. It was something that people found out about later, and then it became popular. Kind of sounds like some movies, doesn't it? But again, we have these large life forms that do really exist. And so, again, it's something that's flicking you right in the eye saying, there really are giant life forms out there. I mean, sure, if you want to say these aren't really giant life forms, I mean, it's not that big. I mean, maybe it's a matter of perspective again, isn't it? What is the largest dinosaur that ever walked? Did it ever exist? I know they've got other names for it, and they always seem to be assigning new names to dinosaurs. I think they've changed them how many times since I've been alive. And yeah, it's very interesting. Maybe we just need to get some more Jurassic Park films or Jurassic World or Jurassic Universe, whatever we're going to go with next, because, it's just going to be a remake or reimagining, and we'll get even bigger dinosaurs again because we got better CGI. Now, there's also considering the concept of mammals and what giant rhinos once looked like. And again, if you go to the Lord of the Rings concept, you can see the gigantic elephants they had. I really wonder what knowledge Tolkien actually had, because he really seemed to be well read in on some things. So, Kathy, dinosaur didn't exist. Perhaps not. But maybe something else existed that is like a dinosaur? Maybe something that we'd refer to as a beast? It's hard to say. I don't know what existed and what didn't exist, especially before I was around. But I have the impression that wondrous things existed that we only have the slightest clue about. Anyways, so that takes us out of the plants and animals variety. Let's go to what you've all been waiting for, the giant humans or other beings. Yes, I'm going to consider the fact that these may actually be other beings, just because it's that interesting. Now, let me get this image up here. And of course, we're going to go back and start with the aforementioned Alton Giant from Illinois, the Midwest. But remember, there were many other giants in other locations as well, as everybody attributed to. And you can certainly look them up on your own. So, Robert Wadlow from Illinois, 8 feet 11 inches. Very, very tall. And in the Guinness Book of World Records, nobody doubts or denies that Robert here existed and lived a life. Now, the official scientific explanation, the medical explanation, is that Robert had a very unique condition that caused him to go into this hypergrowth spurt. And science can easily explain it. And I guess that's the same explanation for anybody else that we have who was over 8 feet tall. Science can easily explain it. I always found this very dramatic, just seeing his shoe here compared to a regular size 12 shoe. I like to think size 12 is a little bit on the larger size. Not that I'm judging anybody by their foot size, but I think he had a size 37 shoe. Just very impressive when you think of all the ways that this individual was much larger. And there, Dallas lists one of the conditions that we attribute to this to. And of course, we always have our great doctors and our medical theorists who can tell us exactly what's going on, but then we still have struggles because, things are always changing. So, anyways. So the whole point, though, being is that Robert did really exist. Nobody debates it. Robert was nearly 9 feet tall and is still in the Guinness Book of World Records. Now, we do have other accounts, though, that say that there were large people, whether we're talking about myth. Okay, so here we have Maximinus Thrax, 8'6", shorter than Robert. So Maximinus Thrax seems like there's no question that he really was that tall. How likely was that, though, and how would you become Caesar of Rome? I don't know. Again, during the crisis of the 3rd century. About 32 years before that Lucius Aurelian guy showed up. Although he was on the scene before then, but nobody really knows about anything. But then you look at some of these others. Goliath, 10 feet 6 inches. The King of Bashan, 12 feet. And then in southeast Turkey, late 1950s. Now, remember, these have all been thoroughly debunked. We'll get into this in a second here. These are just crazy mythological accounts or things that have not been scientifically verified. But yes, this is where these rumors start. But then you've also got other indications. And there was a lot of debate about the discovery, the findings of giants in North America. And that was extremely contentious. Now, we're actually going to discuss the origin of these giants here in North America. And this is where the story really starts to get very intriguing. So, hey, RB, good to see you. Yes, President Lincoln talked about the giants found in the mounds. It was mentioned in a speech or two, wasn't it? Great reference there, RB, and good to see you. And you are absolutely right. So all these different accounts that we have of these various giants. So here, Serpent Mound, Ohio, it's only 7 feet tall. Not that tall. But then when you go to West Hickory, Pennsylvania, one attributed to being 18 feet tall. Oh, and one from the Iowa mounds being 7'6". And so what's interesting to me is that virtually all of these, with the exception of the top 4, are shorter than Robert Wadlow, a well-documented individual who's in the Guinness Book of World Records that no scientist debates existed, or historian for that fact, and yet most of these giant discoveries that were debunked, and we'll talk about how that happened, were actually shorter than him. And even the top 4, you have to wonder, how extreme is it? How unlikely is it that there were incredible giants in North America? Now, you may recall when we did Tales of the Old World, looking at some of the Native American myth, which, yes, the Native Americans do have myths of giants in North America. And yes, the Native Americans do have myths of the fact that there were cities underground and entire civilizations underground. The ant people, remember that exploration? But, it's just myth. We can write it off, but they do talk about it. Of course, the one thing they don't talk about is crossing the Helicrax or, the Bering Strait when it was frozen. But what to make of some of these images that you see? And you will see plenty of images all over the place, just like I said, that will give you the impression that, yes, beyond any shadow of a doubt, there are giant skeletons out there. But again, it's something you always have to apply a degree of very careful consideration to. And there's a reason I'm slowing down my speech here. And the point behind it is there is a lot of effort to discredit the possibility of something existing by introducing something known to be a fraud. It is a tried and true tactic. And it's even in a very well documented historical story that we're going to examine here in a second. So anytime you see a dramatic picture of skeletal remains with a giant skull or a skeleton and small people behind it or around it, just keep that in mind. Now, going back, there's stories of the giants from the Native Americans, and what were they really? Were they giant spirits? Were they some kind of giant mechanoid or something else entirely? We don't know. I will say, though, that their myths are very compelling and very interesting. New West Reset already knows what I'm going with it. Cardiff Giant. Really, am I that predictable? I guess I am. Maybe I've been doing this too long. Yeah, Atom Bomb. It's always the red-headed giants. Yeah, they talk about them in the southwest of the United States, too. What is it with red hair, anyway? You going to be a red-headed giant? I don't know. Very, very interesting. But they appear everywhere. Now, there's also giants that they found in France and across Europe. And initially, with some of the bone comparisons, these were stated to be giant human bones. But then a good 130 years later, some random anthropologist said, no, these are actually bones of a bear. There's not really a giant. So anytime you have something that's a finding, it seems to be contested. There's always a debate with it. So that's why you always have to take it with a grain of salt. But you still have these myths. I've always found the accounts of the stone giants very interesting. And, I think you all are well aware I'm a bit of a Star Trek fan. And remember that Star Trek V was originally supposed to end with Captain Kirk fighting a couple stone giants. But, they cut his effects budget and, Star Trek V got face planted. But I would still rather watch Star Trek V any day of the week over the new Star Trek films. But that's just a matter of opinion. But the stone giants are intriguing because they do appear in different myths. And they do have a lot of an appearance. And by the way, they did actually realize the stone giant in Galaxy Quest, back when they did good parodies. But then there's also the appearance of giants on all the maps. And I could have put together probably about 2 hours worth of images from the Middle Ages on all the giant humans with smaller humans. And of course, you can attribute that to, well, they were simply depicting them in scale in terms of their rank in society. That's always the justification you'll get. Oh, good one there, Jamie. Yeah, the rock giant from the Never-Ending Story, the rock biter. Great character. Yes, we got to do Old World in film again. I've got to cover Never-Ending Story. Good call out on that. So, Albie, Patagones. Yes, Patagones. And it's yes right there on the map. Or is it Patagones? Patagones. Patagonia. And you're supposed to emphasize the go, apparently. Patagonia giants. Now, according to the story, Magellan had actually picked up 2 of these, but they didn't survive to the end of the journey. Of course, neither did Magellan. He got conked on the head in the Philippines. And somebody told me they were the descendant of one of the people who did said conking on the head. What is it with all these explorers getting conked on the head? I mean, that's the same way Captain Cook ended up in Hawaii. I don't know. But it's intriguing because this goes back to discrediting the whole account of giants because it's just stated to be a myth. These crazy European explorers who somehow managed to navigate their way across hostile seas that were unexplored had this idea that there were giants. But it was never well documented. They didn't really exist. That's what the official history will tell us. So again, it's another conflicting account, as everything with the Middle Ages, medieval time, and even the early so-called Age of Exploration tends to be. So were there Patagonia giants? There are multiple accounts saying there were. There are multiple accounts saying that Magellan even grabbed 2 of them. Who knows for sure? Maybe it is all just myth. I don't know. But once again, taken in totality, we have another story, right, wrong, or indifferent, that says that there were giants that existed. And those are the Patagonia giants. Now, let's go to the piece you've been waiting for. Why is it that we have the Smithsonian very intimately involved with the believed assessment of the fact that giants don't really exist? The individual you're looking at here, and I'm going to try to pronounce the name properly, is Ales Hadlika, a Czech individual who was the first, and here's the real legend for you, or the real direction on it. And no disrespect to anybody who's of Czech background. I never spoke Czech, and I'm sure I completely butchered the pronunciation of the name. But he was the curator of physical anthropology of the Smithsonian Museum from 1904 to 1941. Yeah, long time there, almost 4 decades. And this individual came up with numerous theories and said that there really were no giants, that it was all just the concept of myth and people desiring to believe. Now, this guy also came up with a theory of the Native Americans coming across the Bering Strait and the origin of that, although he got himself in trouble because he said it couldn't have happened more than 3,000 years ago. Although archaeologists, and by the way, this guy was not an archaeologist, he was an anthropologist, so how the heck would he know? But, apparently he did. He was just that good. They said, no, it actually happened more than 10,000 years ago. Again, another conflicting account. It's just a little difference of 7,000 years. So, yes, this individual was the curator, was an anthropologist, and he's basically at the nexus point, if you will, of all this debate about whether giants really exist and the Smithsonian's involvement with them. You know what, Kathy? I don't even know. There's nothing that's actually attributed to that, but, given what's going on with the Smithsonian recently, I'm not saying there's anything questionable there. I would love to go see that castle, but apparently I can't right now. It's just a castle. But anyways, I don't know. Oh, look at that. I remember this guy from high school classes. Yeah. And in the 20th century, he was pushed quite hard. There were a lot of classes that talked about him and his theories. Now, there's something beyond this. Did you know that this guy in his later life, he was big on, how shall we say, the European hypothesis? And that is the origin of all human beings coming from Europe. He was also a critic of the hominid evolution. And so you can see why he kind of got himself in trouble. So it's very ironic that the guy who discredited giants also got himself in trouble with questioning the mainstream. No, I'm not making that up. Oh, by the way, he's also been linked to the development, or at least his work, to the development of American eugenics laws. And he was also an advisory member of the American Eugenics Society in 1926. No, I am not making any of this up, although sometimes I wish I were. Now, of course, we think of eugenics and we always think about the very, very terrifying examples that came with the other guy with the mustache in Germany. But there's something beyond eugenics that go beyond building superior humans. There's a darker concept that say that eugenics could also be used to, how should we say, yield a more subservient type of human being. A human being that doesn't question anything, but still has the ability to follow instructions, if you follow me. So there are two schools of thought behind eugenics. So yeah, all very, very interesting. But because of this individual being the curator with the Smithsonian and debunking giants, and then of course getting himself in trouble because he said, well, the Bering Strait crossing happened only 3,000 years ago. It didn't happen 13,000 years ago. I mean, I'm not an archaeologist, although it's funny that archaeologists are experts in digging things up and assessing how old they are, but then they're not the ones to come up with the final theories. Again, something else interesting. And, we always have this whole concept about the land bridge and the crossing of the Bering Strait, and that's the origin of all Native Americans in North and South America. And yet, oddly enough, you won't really find any kind of oral traditions from many Native Americans that talk about this crossing. And you would think this would be a very, very extreme event. Now, I'm not saying it didn't happen. It's also interesting to think that there's an analogy to this within the Tolkien mythology when the elves followed Meklor or Morgoth to what became Middle-earth, and they had to cross the Helicrax, or the shifting ice, as it were. And there's some wondrous artwork with that. And it was a very difficult and dangerous crossing. And the question I always had is, if those people had such a good life and everything they needed in Siberia, why would you want to cross the Bering Strait anyway? I don't know. It's just one of those things, and it's one of those details that always comes up in many different references. Now, here's something else. There are a lot of media references that indicate that there really were giants. But take this with a grain of salt, because do we trust the media or don't we trust the media? That's always the question of the day. And people will say, there was once a time when there was journalistic integrity. Look, if you want to believe that, that's completely fine. Maybe there was. My perspective, the only journalistic integrity there was fiction, and that was in the original Superman comic. Outside of that, journalistic integrity is dependent on many factors. Much like academic integrity, it's dependent on many factors. Sure, if you want to think it's objective, that's completely fine. But intriguing here is that, again, we have another list of all these different giants, and Mound builders actually refer to Native Americans, I suppose, although one of the other points of contention was that the giants were just as the Native Americans coincidentally described them. They had lighter skin and red hair, so who the heck knows for sure? And here you can see where they were found. And oddly enough, you're not seeing extreme heights on these. A lot of 7-foot giants and 8-foot giants. Virtually all of these, I think only the 9-foot tall ones, are up to the height or above Robert Wadlow. So again, a well-documented world record holder that everybody knows existed, and all these giants listed were shorter. What to make of this? I just don't know. But then there's also the other concept of giant skeletons being found. Now, again, what scientists and historians will tell you is that the media was all over the place. They didn't know what the heck they were doing back in the 1800s, early 1900s. They didn't have journalistic integrity. They just ran whatever story they wanted to. Now, yes, we all know that propaganda was necessary to win World War II, and that's when papers printed what they were supposed to print. And I'm sure that after World War II, nobody ever thought that the media could be used to actually steer the entire population. Why would anybody do such a thing? It's just completely absurd. So what to make of these articles? Well, I would say that they're clues, but they need to be taken with a grain of salt. Now, moving on past clues, we're going to go with the origin of all giant contention, going all the way back, you'll never guess it, to the 1800s, the start of everything. And that is the story of the Cardiff Giant. Now, this was a big how-to-do that started in 1869. And you see the name P.T. Barnum involved with this. A giant that was dug up in New York in 1869. And they showcased it. 10 feet, 4 inches tall, taller than Goliath, whom David slew. See, even back in the 1860s, everybody knew that story. Guess it never really went away, did it? It's always been there. And yet what we found out was the Cardiff Giant didn't really exist. It was all from the idea of this individual, George Hull. George Hull was simply a purveyor of tobacco. He owned some smoke shops. And because he got into an argument with some of his more religious-minded friends who told him, well, the Bible said giants existed and he was on his own, he wanted to do a scam to prove that anybody could be scammed. Look at those eyes. Ah, yes, those eyes that you always see in the 1800s. So yes, a guy who just ran a tobacco shop and got upset because his friends said that the Bible was right and he was wrong, which, in the 1800s, kind of like the Middle Ages, I thought, in the United States and in Europe, the Bible was the final authority. And if you questioned it, bad things would happen to you. But he decided he was going to run a scam. And he was going to run a scam by building a giant and say that it was mummified, petrified. Now, the story is really crazy because if you look up the historical account of it, Mr. Hull contracted a group of people in Fort Dodge, Iowa, no, I'm not making this up, to carve out this piece of material that this giant was made out of. Now, there's conflicting accounts in terms of what the material actually was. Fort Dodge, Iowa is also a very interesting area itself. This is what it looks like today. Yes, it's in Iowa, so naturally it's another old world community. But he told them that he was going to use this material to make a statue of Lincoln. Oh, so once again, Lincoln enters the story. But that's not what he did. And so then they fashioned the Cardiff Giant and said that they literally pulled it out of the ground and that it was a real-life mummified giant. And everybody was fooled. Now, when the media got involved and P.T. Barnum got involved, they eventually called George Hull's bluff, or George Hull just came out and said it. Here's a historical photo of the giant actually being pulled out of the ground or exhumed in 1869. So I guess they crafted it, buried it, and then pulled it out of the ground. All that work from a guy who just owned a tobacco shop. That must have been a very profitable venture. I mean, was this guy just so loaded with money? And remember, this was before we had the Federal Reserve. This was before you could take out a loan on anything and everything in the United States. You actually had to have the hard currency to do things. He apparently had the money and the time just because he was angry that some people at church told him the Bible was right. And he did this and orchestrated this entire scam to show that anybody could be fooled. Ironically, though, this is what continues to this day, this whole questioning, this whole concept that anything that we see must be fraudulent. Even though, Robert Wadlow really did exist, and at almost 9 feet tall, he was only about 1 foot shorter than this giant that was stated to be a fraud. And of course, here you have it, the Cardiff Giant. And this is when George Hull passed away, who fooled the public with that figure, dead at Binghamton, New York. I'm sure he still had those eyes on display in his coffin. Not to be morbid about it, but it's just very, very intriguing. And here you can see some figures of this giant that was carved out. Yeah, exhumed at Cardiff. So what are your thoughts on this? Kung Fatty, some of the old world is still below the rivers and lakes, beyond any shadow of a doubt. Made from wood. No doubt about it. Oh, there you go. No primary or secondary reference or observations from the so-called science community, just his cognitive dissonance. QCZ, more red herrings. Jedi, all true giants have 6 fingers. True, except for Count Rogan and Princess Bride. But, what can you say about that? Justin says it there. I guess size does not matter. And the concept of man-made lakes. Yeah, that's true. Oh, good call out there, sissy. Its feet are awfully small. And KC says it very well here. I think we've been lied to about everything. Now, did this even really happen? Yeah, Robert says it very well here. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether this happened or didn't. I find it interesting that this story from 1869 is so well documented and well remembered in and of itself. And it reminds me of that episode from The Simpsons, Lisa the Skeptic, and this was like the last season of the Golden Age Simpsons in the late 90s. You might remember it, where they found a skeleton with angel wings. And if you haven't seen the episode, it turned out that it was just an ad to point them to the opening of a mall. And yet people thought that it was some kind of religious sign. Yeah, Lisa the Skeptic. There's a lot of hints in this Golden Age Simpsons episode. So I would advise watching it, because you can also find, just because one person scammed a giant, does that mean that somebody else actually found a giant? Did Robert Wadlow really exist? Well, they say he did, but it's just one of those interesting things. Oh, by the way, another little note. They apparently did the same thing with Civil War General Thomas Meagher, if I'm not saying that properly, one of those Irish officers who, by the way, was involved in the revolutions of 1848 and then decided to go fight in the Civil War. Yeah, apparently they said that they exhumed his body too later. So very, very similar to the whole giant story. So what's truth and what's fabrication? In conclusion, I have no idea. I guess you just don't really know, and that's the point. So, what to make of all these giants? Well, in our explorations, we come across many structures. And what are these structures that we've seen? Are there really giant buildings? Well, what I want to get at, and we've certainly seen all the buildings that have giant doorways that you could either get giant beams or an entire army through. But I wanted to talk about the concept of colossal structures. Now, remember, this is just a concept. But it's interesting to me that we have things such as the 2-mile-high tower, the Ultima Tower, and it's just a concept. But here you can see how it towers over all of the greatest skyscrapers today. A single building. That's really about the height of a mountain, albeit a smaller mountain. But then when you look at some of these other images, and by the way, here's a question. Is this a real image or is this a fabricated image? Jamie. Yeah, I'm getting there, Jamie. I'm getting there. But yes, Tower of Babel. John, ancient beings considered demigods are of the same breed. That could well be. Oh, very good, Tough. Real, fabricated. Not a real image. Oh, well, I'll let you know. You're actually both right. This is an altered image of the Adolphus Hotel. You might remember we looked at this in Dallas. So the structure is real. The details on it are real, but the image has been altered, of course, for artistic purposes. And you may remember in the Dallas exploration, we covered this, one of these fascinating hotels. But there's lots of artistic images like that show different structures. Now, there's also other concepts of very large buildings. So we've got the Ultima Tower. We have Exceed 4000. And we've got the Tokyo Tower of Babel. Yes. Now, is it possible that there was once a time in the past when structures this large, by the way, does anybody know how tall 30,000 meters would be? And by the way, is that compared to the actual height of the Tower of Babel that it must be? Yeah, they've done a couple on it, actually. Oh, look at that, Vaughn. Easy answer. If it comes through a screen, it's not real. Oh, hallelujah. Yes, you are absolutely correct. That's why you need to go see things in person. But this concept of these structures being this large and where they've been and what they've been, it's existed a lot longer than we realize. We have these old images that show these city layouts, and they seem to be very detailed city layouts. Walls, structures, bunch of castles, some obelisks, and little Tower of Babel here right in the middle of it. Was this an actual city layout? Was this a really old bird's eye view? Or was this an actual functioning city that we're looking at? And if it is a functional city that we're looking at, how different is it from anything that we know or know of? What's the scale of it? Are there different scales of beings? There's also the relentless and ubiquitous carvings that we have. And whether we're in India or Petra, Jordan, it's very intriguing to think that mainstream history tells us that all these elaborate structures, which of course they can't say were made through natural means. Sorry, we can't use the glacier volcano explanation here. So we have to say that it was carved. Do you really think a structure this elaborate was actually carved? And if it wasn't carved, then by what means was it really constructed? Oh, very good, Rachel. Very good. Yeah, they made it from the top down. And as Leo says it, to a giant scale. And that's where things get interesting. So, does it mean there were giant beings? Does it mean that there were humans that had increased capabilities? Did they have some system like high pressure water, some other form of cutting, or is this rock actually an artificially constructed material? Was it made with some sort of frequency or sound? All theories are on the table. But it's funny how it all relates back to the possible existence of what may have been in the past. The incredible Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Where exactly was Babylon? Well, it's in what today is Iraq, I guess, but I don't know for sure. That looks familiar, doesn't it? But yet, in the background, they show the Hanging Gardens of Babylon with the Tower of Babel in the background. It was just a ziggurat. That's all it was. It really wasn't that tall. Of course, they show this one going to the sky. So, not sure what to make of it. It does, again, provide many hints and many clues. And by the way, please hit that like button and support the channel. We're coming to our final conclusion here with the giant exploration. But every time you see a large doorway, or my favorite, the very high ceilings, and someone tells you the whole reason that they built those high ceilings was for airflow. Really? They had the capacity to do that? So why aren't we still doing that today then? I want a train station like in Kansas City with a 100-foot tall ceiling so it's cooler. Why isn't everybody doing that? And why aren't we doing it today? Well, we just don't care to do it. Clara, the bubble tower has prepared the climate or weather for the city around it. Ah, yes. Very, very true. You got it, Sean. Of course it's a griffin. What else would it be? It's not really a griffin. Those aren't griffins on the Plummer Building in Rochester, Minnesota. I don't know what they are. And here another one of these images. And this is actually a structure from San Francisco, the Humboldt Bank Building. So it's a very real building. The details on it are very real. And I think you can see our favorite cartouche. Boy, did I get in trouble for going into that cartouche exploration, let me tell you. Oh, and a nice portal window. But the image itself has been altered. So what am I getting at here? Just the fact that even when you have images that are of real, well-documented structures with great pediments over said cartouches, it's important to remember that images can always be altered, past, present, or future. Anything you see on any screen anywhere could be altered. I always keep that in mind. And then, if you go to Ethiopia, you can find these incredible churches that apparently they just carved out of the rock. Now, let's think about this. Let's really think about this. Let's be generous here and say the mainstream account is correct. Let's say that they really did do this. How much effort would go into this? What kind of logistical effort would go into this? And by the way, all imagery aside, I've actually been on site and really seen these structures in person. They do exist, and they do exist as this image shows you that they are. Yeah, no way, says Robert. Where's the excess rock? Great question there, KC933. Where the heck is it? Laser from Vimena firing down. I would accept that as a more reasonable explanation, Sean, than somebody just carving it. Because think about that. If they carved it, all your questions are valid. What kind of logistical effort would it take to have all these carvers working on this? How exactly do you achieve these kind of details with carving? This kind of precision with hammer and chisel? Could anybody have done this at any point in time? And oddly enough, there are many structures like this all over the land. And how does it relate to giants? Well, it's again either hinting at a greater capability or a completely different kind of being. Because are giants demigods? Are they a completely different race of humans? Or has our entire species of humanity been altered over time? Have we been degraded in certain ways? Or maybe I should say, have we been reduced? Is it the other school of thought with quote unquote eugenics? No, we're not going to use eugenics to create a race or creatures that are more suited for survival. We're going to create an entire species that's more suited to follow instructions. It's nothing bad or evil. And no, there's no one who's ever written a book that talked about using eugenics in that manner, did they? So is that what happened at a much grander scale? Or is it just a crazy idea? Because when you look at some of these artistic renderings of cities from Sumer and Babylon, they seem to defy any capability of any sort of time frame. I know they're just artistic renditions. But then, you look at the Art Deco buildings, and no one can even build Art Deco buildings like this anymore. And why is it we have all these Art Deco buildings that have this, how shall we say, image alteration done on them? It's kind of the same thing with the Cardiff Giant. It's a fraud. If we induce one fraud and everybody knows about it, then ultimately everything that is found with it is a fraud. It's the all or nothing principle. And it's funny to me how that always seems to apply to anything and everything. Reminds me of an exploration I was doing where I just happened to mention the whole diamond concept with the 4 state capitals of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Illinois. Someone said, well, I plotted the coordinates and that line wasn't exact. And that was just one sentence in an exploration that I'd done that was about 40 minutes long. So yeah, I guess if you prove one thing wrong, you prove everything wrong. Great thought process there. And yes, Jamie, I am going to show the Tower of Babel again because I've always found this image very compelling. Is it possible that there were once structures that were this large and really had this kind of impression on the landscape? Here's what's interesting to me. And thanks, Jacob. I appreciate that. And this is what I'm going to say in conclusion to this whole concept of giant everything. Everybody still remembers the story of David and Goliath. It was remembered in the 1860s. Apparently, it's remembered now. Everybody knows the story of the Tower of Babel. It was known in the distant past. Incredible structures here. I know that John Levi and many other explorers have looked at these and showcased this very prominently, and you can see everything, even details of a reset down here with the older structure, the foundation structure below this interesting cylindrical structure, nice dome and lots of columns on it. And even some, igloo type structures, very interesting, little domes. What were they indeed? And yet you have other structures. Oh, look, more domes over here. But then just this mammoth, incredible tower. And remember, if you watch the film Metropolis, one of the first science fiction films, not the first, but one of the early well-known ones from the 1920s, then what is the name of the tower that the city is run from? Is it all a coincidence? I'm not really sure. Is it possible that someone really did build a structure like this? Again, were they giant beings or were they just humans with enhanced capabilities? Maybe they were both. But like I said, we still remember this. These stories endure. The Tower of Babel, David versus Goliath, and every other myth of giants from every other culture and religion and everything that you can originate it from. Albie, inside the ziggurats, there was a bar area. Oh boy. Yes, Metropolis. Absolutely right. And KC says it. Maybe they were not human at all. Maybe not. Maybe they were beings from a completely different land. Who knows for sure? But it's all interesting thoughts. It's a 5-story building. That's not a tower by modern standards. Yeah, sure. So it's just interesting, though, when you look at this and all these ideas with the structures. So, in closing, wonders of the previous era. Why is it I always go back to the 5 eras theory? Why do I think it's still relevant after all this time? The reason being is that I think that every bit of evidence and example that we look at, it goes back to the 5 eras theory. What were the real wonders of the previous eras? It seems to be clear that technology was greater in the past, that the capabilities of humans or whatever beings were around was greater. Clara, the giants built the palaces for the gods, and when they went home again, we occupied everything and caused trouble with the giants, perhaps. That could be. And if you listen to the prologue that's wonderfully delivered at the start of Conan the Barbarian, it actually says that very thing. So, anyway, it's one of the foundational ideas of the channel, though, and it's a theory, and it's still a theory. But in the past, we had greater capability. And who knows, maybe it wasn't we. Maybe it was a completely different set of beings that we can't even define. As KC said, maybe they weren't even human. We don't know. But in the distant past, whoever was on the land seemed to be capable of much greater achievements. And we can still see the remnants of it in many places. So we will be doing a live stream in the future concerning both these maps that show us where these trees are that you could do navigation with, and also the concept of mud fossils, because I think they're very, very interesting. Sean, humans were larger back when. Giants were different breeds, hence giant doors and structures. And there is a lot of evidence to back that up. David, atmospheric changes between eras could have changed our physical attributes, air pressure as examples. And I think that's something we have to remember, that when we look at these different eras, things changed in every way we can even begin to imagine between the 4th and the 3rd era. Perhaps that's the huge change that we had, that these resets were such profound events, these hard resets, that everything, in a manner of speaking, was turned upside down. I mean, just think about that. Are there really any limits to physical laws, or could all physical laws have been different? Could there have been forces that we think of as magic in the 4th era? And really all it was just more advanced technology that we still refer to as alchemy. That's just the previous era. What sort of incredible things existed in the first 3 eras? And there's a reason why you can't really touch the first 3 eras, because it was so long ago, at least in terms of relative time to us. I mean, who knows how long ago it really was? Maybe it was only 400 to 500 years ago, real time. Although we don't even know what date it is or what year it is. That's why I just laugh on, putting any kind of current year. 2023? Well, what's the difference between 2023 and 2025? I don't know. Was there a 1750? Was there an 1850? People think it was just 1,000 years that was added or taken away from the timeline. Well, how the hell do we know where we are in the timeline? It's a guess. Yeah, if you take a lot of things at face value, which requires trusting a lot of people, yeah, as Michael says it here, J850, then yes, maybe you can get an idea, but we just don't know. Yeah, and there you go, KC933. Or as the famous saying goes, it's the agreed upon truth or the agreed upon lie, depending on one's perspective. And so that's where we have to look at it. That's where it all begins. Anyways, so what to say about giants? There are a lot of indications that giants existed. And despite all the effort to try to convince us otherwise, we can't deny the fact that every culture, every myth, every origin refers to them, just like they refer to colossal buildings. And you can go out there and you can actually see these buildings with your own eyes. You can go to Portugal, Spain, anywhere in the land and see these giant doorways, see these giant structures, and you can come to your own conclusions. But they are real and they can be interfaced with. And yes, if you're in Kansas City, go to Union Station there. Look at the ceiling. Maybe you will accept the fact that it was just done for cooler air in the early 1900s. But that's where we are. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this exploration on giants. And before you go, please hit the like button. And I know it's a little bit outside of the comfort area for a lot of explorers. And I know there are some alternative explorers who won't cover giants at all. And that's nothing against them because it is a contentious topic. And there are a lot of questions with it. But it's something that we're going to continue to explore. And it's something that we need to look into. And you know what, QCZ, I'm glad you brought that up. Gulliver's Travels alone is a great exploration. And yeah, it got me as well. Hey, Donna Marie, good to see you. Well, everyone, thank you for joining me. Please hit the like button before you go, and we'll see you on the next live stream. And this is Lucius Aurelian signing off. Have a great week wherever you are.